Chapter 241. Peng. The bathtub fell. Eunuch's son politely asked Hellion Vivian, "Miss, the bathtub and wine are ready, what else?" "And firewood." Hellion Vivian ordered without looking up. "Yes." Eunuch's son hesitated for a moment and asked people to prepare these things that were supposed to be used for bathing. After the firewood was sent in, Hellion Vivian ordered people to boil water, and then let the retired emperor and the ministers all sit in the wooden tub. The scene was not so much saving people, but steaming people with boiling water. Under the wooden tub was an iron frame, and below it was burning firewood. The firewood was burning more and more vigorously. After a while, the room became full of steam. So far, the ministers are in a state of dizziness. They only want to give medicine to a dead horse. They don't think that the little girl in front of them can really solve the problem. After Hellion Vivian saw that the water was boiling, she directly poured all the wine in the wine jar into the bathtub. It didn't take her more than half an hour to do these things. When a doctor saves people, no matter what he does, he looks particularly convincing. But can you detoxify in this way? Eunuch's son looked at His Royal Highness eagerly. It's not safe, right? If something goes wrong, the retired emperor? Hellion Vivian was completely unaffected by others. She even asked Yuan Xiaoming to pick a tomato from the fantasy space to compensate for her physical strength. She stood lazily in the steam and reached out to wipe the temperature of the water in the wooden tub. Hellion Vivian casually took the medicinal materials brought by the imperial doctor and threw them into the bathtub one by one. The boiling water instantly rolled the herbs into the bottom of the tub. The smell of medicine in the room was getting stronger and stronger, which made Yuan Xiaoming feel choked when he breathed. "Woman, why do you put these messy things in? You don't need these things to detoxify them." The manipulative martial artist only needs to use internal force to expel the poison from their bodies. "I'm just making myself look more professional." Hellion Wei continued to toss in the medicinal herbs as she lazily replied, "Otherwise, if I detoxify them as soon as I make a move, everyone will know that I'm a combat-type martial artist. Now that I have another layer of identity as the Phoenix Girl, it's best not to expose my strength if I can. And it will show that my medical skills are superior." She didn't. Okay. Yuan Xiaoming was convinced. He transformed into a virtual shadow and floated above Hellion Wei. When he glanced sideways at the side, that imperial physician was actually seriously remembering what kind of herbs Hellion Wei put in. He even clearly murmured what to put in first and what to put in later. He had an expression of "I remember it all." "What's going on?" "Done." Hellion Wei put down the medicinal herbs in her hands, then sat on the ground. Her palms supported the outside of the wooden barrel, slightly exerting force. With the previous smell of wine and sweat, the poison overflowed from the wooden tub in just a second. The ministers looked at the black gas that surged out and knew that they were safe. They sat down, crossed their legs, and closed their eyes to rest. Hellion Vivian frowned. She felt that it was a waste of time to do it one by one. She simply put one hand on the side and at the same time, she exerted force. In the boiling water, a silent airflow was formed above the tub. Everyone was silent about the detoxification and didn't notice it. Only Bailey Jiu leisurely rotated his finger. The black ring emitted an ink-colored light, which was reflected in his long and narrow eyes, appearing exceptionally bright. He looked at Hellion Wei, who was using her internal energy, with a smile that was not a smile. This woman was like a bottomless mystery. He really wanted to know what kind of her he would see when he peeled off these mysteries layer by layer. Bailey Jiu's thin lips curled up devilishly. Finally, the last person was detoxified by Hellion Vivian. The green color on his face faded, and he recovered his usual color. "Don't use your power now." Hellion Vivian stood up and brushed the dust off her body. She smiled and said, "Everyone's physical strength is still too weak. Wait until this stick of incense burns out, then we'll see." Being able to detoxify already made the ministers very surprised. Now, they heard that they could recover their martial chi in just a stick of incense's time. Everyone couldn't help but look at Hellion Vivian. Although they weren't like those madams and misses in the boudoir who liked to talk about the rumors and slanders in the capital, They also knew that the eldest daughter of the Hellion family was someone who didn't know anything. But today, she actually detoxified the bone-eroding poison that no one could detoxify. She pulled all of them back from the brink of death. The ministers didn't know how to describe their mood at this moment. They could only look at Hellion Vivian. For a moment, their hearts were like spilled seasonings. Sour, sweet, bitter, spicy, and salty, the taste was not ordinary. Girl, this time's great kindness, my Naylan family will never forget it. Old General Naylan was very heroic. In the future, if you need my Naylan family's help, just tell me at any time. Even Imperial Dr. Jiang, who was known as a magical hand, surrounded Hellion Vivian and said with enthusiasm, I didn't expect that the bone-eroding poison was actually solved in this way. By soaking in boiling water, the poison was eliminated from the pores. Those medicinal materials must have also played a role. Yuan Xiaoming laughed twice and said, this old man is so stupid and naive. You can shut up. After Hellion Vivian replied to Yuan Xiaoming's words with a stream of consciousness, she turned her head and said, Retired Emperor, I have other things to do. Since the poison has been detoxified now, my friend and I will leave first. Friend. Eunuch Sun's eyes automatically fell on his master. His Highness also wanted to follow. In the case that the retired emperor was seriously injured. You go first. Belegaju's side face was cold and handsome, and there was a smile on his face. I will stay here and rest for a while. Hellion Vivian frowned. Rest? Are you hurt? No. Belegaju seemed to be sleepy, and his slender fingers rubbed his eyes. It's just a night of walking, too tired. Hellion Vivian nodded and expressed her understanding. Then you wait for me here first. Okay. Belegaju's mouth slowly hooked up. Eunuch Sun watched on the side. He didn't say anything, but the villain in his heart jumped up and down. Pretending. His Highness is definitely pretending again, right? Hellion Vivian, who was about to leave, looked at Belegaju and suddenly narrowed her eyes. When did your eyes recover? Belegaju's fingers paused, and he looked down calmly. When you cut your hand. I was wondering. Hellion Wei muttered. If he had recovered earlier, he wouldn't have let her hold his hand all the way back. Thinking about this, Hellion Wei turned her head and said to Eunuch Sun, Eunuch Sun, I'll have to trouble you to prepare a guest room for my friend. Let him sleep for a while, I'll be done very soon. The martial chi competition should not take long. It was time to let those who thought that driving her out of the family could cut off her opportunity to play in the competition completely give up. Chapter 242. Hellion Vivian saw that Eunuch Sun was looking at her table mate and didn't answer her question. She raised her eyebrows and asked, Is Eunuch Sun in some trouble? Ah! Eunuch Sun recovered. Belegaju glanced at him and said faintly, I'll have to trouble Eunuch Sunday. Eunuch Sun choked and coughed heavily. No, cough, no. Miss, don't worry. This old servant will make proper arrangements for your friend. That's good. Hellion Vivian arranged everything and went downstairs. Along the way, she took a set of men's clothing. Yuan Ming smiled evilly in the fantasy space. What? You still want to change? It's inconvenient to fight in a skirt. Hellion Vivian waved her long sleeves. She was handsome and elegant like jade. She looked at herself in the mirror and smiled handsomely. She turned her face and adjusted her collar. Then, he casually walked into the noisy crowd. Eunuch Sun watched the familiar figure disappear before he dared to turn around and look at his master. Your Highness. Belegaju threw away the cloth in his hand. His clean eyes turned cold in an instant. Call the manager of the Phoenix restaurant over. Yes. Eunuch Sun trembled. He knew that His Highness was going to investigate the poisoning thoroughly. Belegaju's finger moved slightly. His silver mask was covered and his white robe fluttered. 18 shadows, listen to my order. This subordinate is here. Swish. Swish. 18 black shadows dropped their robes and knelt down on one knee. Belegaju's eyes were as cold as ice. Go investigate who's called Old Ghost. Yes. The shadows dispersed at the same time. Black feathers fell, leaving only Belegaju's back to the light. Ruthless, evil, indifferent, and emotionless. The ministers were all dumbfounded when they saw the third prince slowly walking in. What was this situation? When Eunuch's son went out, he was still with the White Academy student. When he came in, it was the third prince. Grandson came too late to save you. Belaguju's indifferent tone sounded a little lacking in sincerity. I hope Imperial Grandfather can forgive me. The retired emperor gently coughed a few times, but did not expose his identity. He said in a deep voice, sit down. What's the situation outside? Everything is normal. Belagaju paused for a moment before coldly ordering, you can open the wooden window now. The guards obeyed the order and quickly stood by the window, guarding with swords to ensure that the retired emperor and the others could continue to watch the competition. The difference between the martial chi competition and other competitions was that the contestants selected from all over the country were usually lined up at the back. Their names were not read, only their serial numbers were read. Therefore, not only the ordinary people, but even the elders of the four great families did not know that Hellion Vivian had been surrounded. However, there was one thing that the four great clans had been paying attention to. They were also looking for talents in this competition. Therefore, from the very beginning, they were waiting for the legendary little beggar to appear. Because he had once spread the news that they would meet on the day of the martial chi competition. So far, there had not been any particularly noteworthy contestants on the test field. Except for Hellion Jiawa, who had won first place in several rounds in a row, the rest of the platforms had been calm. It was not until Hellion Vivian, dressed in men's clothing, appeared that the referees who were recording began to slowly pay attention to her. They muttered in their hearts that this person's luck was a little too good. He had already won 3 rounds in a row. Originally, in a competition, one could advance by winning 2 out of 3 rounds. However, this person had not lost once since the beginning of the competition. Gradually, not only the referees, but even the contestants who were waiting to go on stage widened their eyes. No way. He won again. It's been 6 rounds. How come he has not shown any flaws at all? Who is this person? I've never seen him before. It's so strange. Why can't I feel his martial chi? Ah, I remember. Swish. As Hellion Vivian beautifully withdrew her leg, a big man with 2 hammers in his hands was kicked out of the platform in a parabolic curve. Under the platform, one of the contestants shouted excitedly, it's him. Who? It's the beggar master who challenged the 4 big families by himself. What? Look at his moves. He has no martial chi, but he won by surprise. In the world, except for that master, who else can be so powerful? It's really him. Everyone rubbed their eyes. Because they had seen the legendary master, their faces were full of a layer of enthusiasm. Their emotions were surging and their blood was boiling. This was the first time they had been so close to a master. Hellion Wei Wei also didn't pay attention to the crowd's admiring and slightly surprised gazes. She only smiled lightly and stood with her bare hands. Facing the already dumbstruck competitors, she slightly curved her lips. Next. The north wind whistled past. She just stood on the wooden platform like that. Her every move was gentle and languid. Her back was slender like jade, which made people suddenly feel a kind of beauty like splashing ink. Some people themselves had great charm, not ostentatious, not eye-catching. Like snowflakes falling from the sky, cold and noble, silent, unique and unique. Standing on the high platform, Eunuch's son opened his eyes wide. His eyes focused on the person on the platform. He finally understood why His Highness would treat this girl differently. This kind of commotion naturally attracted the attention of the group of people from White Academy. Those aristocratic young masters led by Murong Chang Feng watched from afar with relish, so they followed along and walked over. Even Murong Chang Feng unconsciously watched somewhat seriously. If this kind of master could be used by his Murong manner, it would be like adding wings to a tiger. Good. The recovered retired emperor stroked his beard and laughed deeply. This person is not bad. Ah. Yes. Eunuch's son knew that retired emperor's eyesight was not good. What's more, they were separated by a distance. He really couldn't see that the person he said was not bad was the eldest daughter of the Hellion family. Retired emperor raised his eyebrows. What? You think it's not good? No, no, no. Eunuch's son looked at his master's indifferent eyes and shook his head with all his might. He faced retired emperor and said, "It's because this old servant has never seen such a wonderful competition before." I was dumbstruck all of a sudden. Retired emperor nodded his head in satisfaction. Beligaju then withdrew his gaze from eunuch son and drank a mouthful of tea with an indifferent expression. "Ju, between you and this person, who is more powerful?" Retired emperor's sudden question made all the ministers look over. Beligaju absent-mindedly turned the black jade thumb ring on his finger. The corners of his mouth were stained with a faint evil aura. Just as he was about to open his mouth, suddenly, a cry of surprise came from outside the window. "Wait, why does this master's back look so familiar?" Chapter 243. Helion Mai disagreed. She didn't even look in their direction. She smiled and said, "He's just an amateur. Even if he's good at martial arts, he won't be able to make a name for himself based on his background. It's probably because the rumors in the capital are too exaggerated. That's why he seems to be more powerful. How can he compare to my second sister? She's already won 10 matches in a row." When the young ladies heard this, they all nodded. Miss Mai's words are reasonable. If we were to go to that group, we might be able to win. We are all commoners from all over the place, how could we have any influence? As they spoke, they picked up the teacups in their hands and slowly took a sip. As for Helion Jiao, who was sitting beside them, although she didn't say anything, her eyes were nevertheless brimming with pride. However, she didn't reveal it. Her face still carried a faint bashfulness. She had long since bewitched all the young masters until they were infatuated. However, the student who had exclaimed stood up immediately. "Something's wrong. What's wrong? How can it be her? It can't be her. Who is it?" "Helion Vivian." As Helion Vivian walked down the stage, the academy students' pupils shook heavily. Crash! The cup in Helion Jiao's hand fell to the ground and rolled back and forth. She looked back in disbelief. Seeing Helion Vivian in men's clothing, her face suddenly changed. How could this be? Wasn't this little slut already dead? Why would she appear in the martial chi competition? The expert who challenged the 4 great clans by herself isn't a beggar. She's Helion Vivian. The academy student murmured, her voice getting louder and louder. Murong Chang Feng looked at the approaching figure with a sluggish expression. Wei Wei, on the other hand, lazily pulled open her collar and took a step forward. Her legs were very long and very thin. As she stood under the gradually dyed dusk sky, her back was straight and her posture was handsome and beautiful. Crash! Murong Chang Feng suddenly grabbed the jade pendant in his hand. He used so much strength that even his knuckles turned white. He felt that his breathing had obviously slowed down. His heartbeat was in disbelief as it slowly increased. Helion Jiao's expression turned extremely ugly as she heard the thunderous discussion. Her face turned pale. Amidst the silence in the room, the retired emperor suddenly burst into laughter. Worthy of being the Helion bloodline. It's been so many years, to think that this girl could hold herself back. Good, very good. The ministers instantly lost their ability to speak. Originally, the fact that Helion Vivian had cured the bone-corroding poison was already shocking enough. Now, someone actually told them that the master beggar who had once shocked the capital was Helion Vivian. All of this sounded like a dream. Not only that, the most important thing was that she had won 7 or 8 matches in a row. Next, she was going to face those young ladies of the aristocratic families. In this round, the competition system would be different. The contestants would go up the stage according to their serial number and choose the opponent they wanted to challenge. Helion Jiao narrowed her malicious eyes. She leaned over to Helion Mai's ear and whispered something. Helion Mai's eyes flashed as she waved towards those young ladies of the aristocratic families. Clang! The gong sounded and the final round officially began. Fang family's young lady was the first to go up the stage. Her voice was arrogant. "I choose number 151. 151? Wasn't that Helion Vivian?" Helion Vivian raised her eyebrows and stood up. Please. Please. Fang family's young lady sneered. "You opened an armament shop and you think you're awesome after winning a few matches? Ha! You're just a little bastard." Hearing this, The originally languid Hellion Vivian's eyes tightened. No one could see her movements clearly. They only felt a gust of wind blow past. She had already grabbed Fang family's young lady's arm and fiercely pulled. Only a creak was heard. Fang family's young lady's lips turned white in an instant. The pain was like a tidal wave surging up violently. She looked at her soft arm but was unable to activate her martial chi. Her entire body was paralyzed on the stage. Hellion Vivian's eyes curved into half crescents as she looked down at her. Is it painful? It's right that it hurts. As she spoke, the crisp sound of bones breaking could be heard. Fang family's young lady was in so much pain that her eyes were staring straight ahead. Her face was pale and colorless. It was obvious that she had already lost this round. However, Hellion Vivian did not relax. Because just as she was about to walk back to the resting area, a second voice rang out. I choose number 151, her again. Hellion Vivian suddenly turned around and looked at the arrogant young lady on the stage. Then she looked at Hellion Jiawa, who was below the stage, and smiled. She narrowed her eyes. After the second round, Hellion Vivian won without a doubt. But after winning, she encountered the same situation as before. She had fought her way up from the preliminary round. Even if she wasn't tired, she would still be thirsty. Furthermore, the higher she fought, the stronger her opponent would be. Everyone had different martial chi attributes. Hellion Vivian had to constantly change her moves to ensure that she won all the way. It was obvious that they wanted to use this method of attrition battle to deplete her battle strength and stamina. Although there was no rule in the competition that said that they couldn't continuously challenge the same contestant. But this was too much. Wasn't this clearly bullying? The officials standing in the building couldn't help but sigh. But what surprised them was that the royal family, who had always been expressionless, had actually faded away from their usual indifference. A trace of cold light flashed through their deep, well-like eyes. That light was like a sharp blade, causing people to feel a chill in their hearts. And Ying, go and find out whose idea this was. And Ying lowered his eyes respectfully. Yes. The officials standing at the side were flabbergasted. They really didn't understand. Did the royal family never interfere? Why did they speak up today? Belagaju's long and narrow eyes, other than the thick cold, there was a faint murderous aura. Hellion Vivian was his person. Even if she was bullied, only he could bully her. Clang. Another sound of the drum rang out. The referee naturally saw through the twists and turns, but he couldn't do anything because the competition still had to go on. Hellion Vivian didn't show any emotions. In her world view, this method wasn't much. In the modern world, this kind of unfair thing was normal. This world was originally a world where the strong preyed on the weak. The winner was the king and the loser was the bandit. It was just that the methods were different. But did they really think that by doing this, she would be at a loss? Insignificant tricks. They really underestimated her title as the Queen of Munitions. Hellion Vivian smiled and narrowed her eyes dangerously. She slightly curved her lips towards the referee. Referee, I just looked at the competition rules and made a decision. What decision? The referee frowned. Hellion Vivian looked at him and said word by word, I want to fight 1 against 10. Chapter 244. Hua. Once this was said, there was an uproar. The meaning of 1 against 10 was very simple. When the number of challengers reached 10, the one being challenged could choose to fight together. In that case, if they won this round, they could directly enter the finals. However, due to the harsh conditions, except for 10 years ago, after the Genius 3 halls had passed all the stages with the result of 1 against 10, this competition system had never been mentioned again. Now, at such a time, Hellion Wei actually proposed 1 against 10? Did she not want to live anymore? She was really stupid. Hellion Jiawa sneered and gave Hellion Mai a look. Hellion Mai nodded and took the lead to fly up the stage. Following her were 2 young masters from aristocratic families and 7 young ladies from government officials. It was obvious that they wanted to take Hellion Vivian's life. However, Wei's face didn't change at all. Only the corners of her mouth curved into a smile that was dyed with a bit of evil. Woman, what are you planning now? Yuan Ming appeared. Hellion Vivian curved her thin lips. It's just a competition. What do you mean by what I'm planning now? Yuan Ming raised his eyebrows. It was obvious that he did not believe her. At this moment, those 10 people had already started to use their martial chi and were about to pounce on Hellion Vivian. This made Eunuch Sun break out in cold sweat for her. All along, Hellion Vivian had been using close combat. In close combat, if it was 1 against 1, it would bring out the greatest effect. But if it was 1 against 10, close combat would only cause Hellion Vivian to die faster. Everyone held their breaths. Their eyes were filled with nervousness as they watched the battle unfold in the ring. However, what they did not expect was that the 10 people, including Hellion Mai, could not bring out a trace of wind with their punches. Hellion Mai stared blankly at her hand. When she looked up again, Hellion Vivian had already appeared beside her like a phantom. With a cool flying kick, she kicked her off the stage. When the other contestants saw this, they hurriedly circulated their chi, only to find that there was no way to gather the chi in their dantian. What was going on? The remaining few people looked at each other. Before they could communicate with each other, Hellion Vivian was already like a sword out of its scabbard, dashing through the crowd. She grabbed one of the people's arm and exerted force. Creak. At the same time, Hellion Wei abruptly flipped over, her black hair fluttering in the wind. She lifted one of her legs and in an instant, struck the body of the man who came against the wind, kicking him to a place a meter away. Bang, bang, bang. However, the people who came to challenge her were all lying under the stage, painfully clutching their stomachs. In addition to their whole body going soft, they did not notice that their chi was being drained. This was the effect of the cultivation dissipation powder. It could invisibly dissolve the chi in the martial artist's body without being noticed by the martial artist. Of course, this did not mean that Hellion Vivian did not know. Even Yuan Ming thought of something, his eyes slightly narrowed, so that's how it is. Woman, you noticed that they were also poisoned, so you let them come together, right? In vain, they wanted to join hands to teach me a lesson. Of course, I have to give them a little gift in return. Hellion Vivian smiled coldly. Her appearance was like a smiling demon walking in hell. Yuan Ming also laughed. It is estimated that in less than half an incense, they will be poisoned. Hehe, this is going to be interesting. Hellion Vivian did not comment and stood straight. Her left hand was raised by the referee, representing an absolute victory. The crowd had exploded. They opened their eyes wide and looked at Hellion Vivian on the stage. 1 against 10? She actually won. People always say that the eldest daughter of the Hellion family is a shameless waste. Usually, in addition to following behind Murong young master, she does not know how to do anything. Not to mention that she is ugly, even her usual behavior is arrogant and despotic, which makes people unable to look at her. But today, they saw with their own eyes what kind of woman she is. Unyielding, neither servile nor overbearing, quite a general style. However, what is worrying is that she has begun to thoroughly expose her fatal weakness, that is, she has never shown her chi. This is a very bad phenomenon for a martial artist. Especially when your opponent is a master of the martial arts of the golden rank. Hellion Jiaoer saw this point and walked on the stage with a smile. Her mouth had a soft and weak shyness. Her appearance easily aroused the desire of men to protect her. Therefore, for her to come on stage at this time, people only thought it was a coincidence and would not associate these conspiracies with her. Elder sister. Hellion Jiaoer let out a long sigh and looked at Hellion Wei, as if she couldn't bear to do so. I also didn't want to take advantage of the situation, but the competition rules are like this, I can only come up. However, if you want to give up the competition, it's not too late now. You can go and talk to the referees and ask them to let you leave. Hellion Vivian sneered, if you really do not want to take advantage of others, why did you not even give me time to drink a sip of water and come on stage? Hellion Jiaoer was choked by her words and her expression changed. The faint smile also stiffened at the corner of her mouth. The suspicious eyes of the people below the stage made her take a deep breath. Bang! The drums sounded. Hellion Jiaoer brushed past her with a smile on her face, but the words that came out of her mouth could only be heard by the two of them. See if I don't kill you this time. Hellion Vivian walked past her and did not even look at her. This bitch dares to ignore me. Hellion Jiawa clenched her left hand. As soon as the drums stopped, she narrowed her eyes and her whole body shone with a golden light. The martial qi in the air was like a roaring sea, so vast that it could not be detected. That is. The people below the stage gasped, their mouths and eyes slowly widened. They stared at Hellion Jiawa and their voices were full of surprise. Gold Stage 9. I can't believe that Hellion Jiawa's cultivation has reached such a high level. One must know that in the Great Huang dynasty, there were only a few people who could reach the gold stage. Those who could reach gold stage 5 were even rarer. Hellion Jiao, on the other hand, had cultivated to level 9. She could reach the peak of the gold stage with just one more stage. As expected of the legendary genius, the reincarnation of the Phoenix Girl, Hellion Jiawa really lives up to her name. This also meant that Hellion Wei's chances of winning against the other party were extremely slim. It was even possible that she, who did not have any martial qi, would lose to Hellion Jiawa. The two women coldly faced each other on the stage. No one knew who would tear the other apart in the next second. Suddenly, Hellion Jiawa waved her long sword, bringing out layers of waves. Haze, cut off all light. Chapter 245. A strange black fog rose up behind Hellion Vivian. All the light seemed to be absorbed in an instant. Suddenly, everything turned pitch black. Nothing could be seen, nothing could be heard. The arena had become extremely quiet. Hellion Vivian was shrouded in it. She couldn't even tell the direction, let alone see Hellion Jiawa's actions. Just when everyone thought Hellion Vivian was dead for sure, a figure suddenly appeared out of nowhere. Suddenly, a figure walked out of the black fog. Her long hair fluttered in the wind, and her eyes shone brightly. It was as if the surrounding martial qi had no effect on her. Hellion Jiawa's eyes suddenly shook. She reached out to defend, wanting to take this opportunity to kill Hellion Vivian. Unexpectedly, her opponent grabbed the sharp edge of her sword. Wei didn't seem to care in the slightest that her finger was cut. She suddenly exerted force and pulled Hellion Jiao's entire body in front of her. Then, she spun around like a whirlwind. Her slender leg was lifted up high, and she gave him a side kick. Bam! That kick was like a thunderbolt. The sound of the wind cutting through the air was so loud that it was ringing in the ears of the audience. There was no extra movement at all. It was just a beautiful kick. The figure that was sent flying drew a high arc in the air. Heavily, she fell on the arena. Hellion Jiawa lay on the cold ground. Her eyes were dark and she didn't feel any pain. She was so confused that she didn't know what had happened. After a long time, the dizziness slowly dissipated. The audience was in an uproar. A person without qi actually defeated an expert who was about to reach the peak of the gold rank. This was unheard of. Wait, look at what's on her body. That's qi. That's right, it was qi. There was almost no qi, but it formed a stream of air. It turned into wisps of wind that surrounded Hellion Vivian, forming a faint barrier. Unlike other people's gas, the gas surrounding her did not have any color. What kind of attribute was this? Everyone looked at each other. Other than shock, there was also disbelief. Sitting in the private room, a black-haired man in ivory-white clothes curled his thin lips, and there was a hint of playfulness on his gentle and elegant face. Master. A black shadow descended, its fingernails black. The plan failed. The man took a sip of tea and did not seem to be surprised by this result. His eyes fell slightly and his voice was deep. I understand. You may leave. Yes. The shadow hesitated for a while and said, then, should we give the antidote to the young ladies and young masters who drank the tea? The man narrowed his eyes. No need. I want to see who cured my bone-corroding poison. Yes. The black shadow retreated in a flash. As the sun set, Hellion Vivian stood on the stage and looked down at Hellion Jiawa, who had been kicked off the stage by her. Her side profile looked extraordinarily handsome. Murong Chang Feng was standing below the stage. This was the first time he looked at Hellion Vivian so seriously. For the first time, he put down his grudges and looked at her. This woman was willing to sacrifice anything for him since she was young. She could do anything. Her eyes never left his body for a moment. She was so silly that it made people feel suffocated. But now, she raised her small face and stood at the peak of the experts. His figure was not in her eyes. At this moment, Murong Chang Feng felt as if his eyes were being stung. Regret swept through his whole body like a tide. Hellion Vivian still stood there. The dazzling golden light shone in her eyes, shining beautifully. Hua! A thunderous applause sounded. Hellion Vivian became famous in one battle. Hellion Jiawa, who was lying on the ground, only felt pain in her internal organs. Compared to the pain in her body, what made her feel even more breathless was that she had actually lost. From birth until now, there had never been a day when she had been so humiliated. Hellion Jiawa tightly clenched her teeth. She looked like a dog eating shit. She didn't look like a young and inexperienced beauty anymore. Her small face was gloomy and her hair was messy. She looked even more unsightly than the servant girl who wanted to help her up. Get lost. She couldn't take advantage of Hellion Vivian, so Hellion Jiawa took it out on the servant girl beside her. Before she could stand still, she slapped her. The maidservant cried out in pain. Everyone couldn't help but look at her. Their eyes were full of meaning, as if they were saying, so it turns out that the second miss of the Hellion family was like this in private. She was worse than a shrew. Realizing what she'd done, Hellion Jiawa immediately retracted her hand. The light in her eyes turned as she lightly shouted, "You little girl, what kind of thoughts do you have? Eldest sister's win is a win. No matter what kind of methods she used, I'm willing to accept my loss. The one who's hateful is you. How dare you instigate me to find trouble with eldest sister? Am I, miss?" The servant girl didn't know why her miss would suddenly say such a thing. She timidly replied, "This servant won't dare to do it again." After these words, those who lost to Hellion Vivian also had a lively idea in their hearts. Naturally, they wanted to find some face for themselves. Their fingers pressed on their injured arms and shouted at the referee, "Referee, this competition is not fair. We request to measure Hellion Vivian's martial chi value." Hellion Vivian only looked at them with a faint smile. The corner of her mouth carried a faint ridicule. However, those people felt that something was wrong. First, they had difficulty circulating their martial chi. Then, there was the colorless and transparent chi surrounding Hellion Vivian. When the crystal ball was tested, there wasn't the slightest bit of martial chi in her body. But now, it became so powerful. She simply used some method that they didn't know about. 10 or so students took advantage of this matter to make a ruckus and asked the referee to redo it. The referees were in a terrible fix because of this situation. Suddenly, one of the most noisy girls reached out and covered her left chest. Her face was ashen as she fell to the side. Followed by an ear-piercing scream, people looked at the girl and took a big step back. What the hell is going on? Another young master was smarter. After seeing the girl's appearance, his first reaction was to check his own pulse. At this time, he found that there was not much martial chi left in his body. It's the cultivation dissipation powder. It must be the cultivation dissipation powder. One after another, all 10 of them put their fingers on their own meridians, shaking their heads in a daze. No, there is not only the cultivation dissipation powder, there is also the bone-eroding poison. Some of them had studied alchemy. According to their own reaction, they quickly knew the seriousness of the matter. The bone-eroding poison was like this. At first, there was no reaction, but after a reaction, everything was too late. That person suddenly panicked. What should we do? What should we do? There is no antidote for the bone-eroding poison. Plus, we just used our own martial chi. Peng. Before he could finish his sentence, another one of the 10 fell to the ground. Chapter 246. Seeing this scene, 2 or 3 ministers who were originally sitting in the Phoenix building couldn't hold back anymore. They quickly walked over and held up their suffering grandchildren. One of them anxiously looked at Hellion Vivian. Quickly detoxify this old man's granddaughter. Hellion Vivian's eyes turned cold. Why should I detoxify her just because you said so? That minister was stunned. He was as anxious as a headless fly. Seeing this, Helian Jiao's eyes turned. She endured the pain in her body and interrupted, "Since Big Sister can detoxify this poison, why don't you help? It's just a matter of convenience." "Big Sister, why are you so unreasonable?" Helian Wei sneered, "Don't understand human feelings? Why should I detoxify a group of people who helped you frame me?" "You." Helian Jiao's face changed. "Big Sister, there are some words that you can't say. When did I frame you? Just because I was the last one to appear." Helian Vivian narrowed her eyes and smiled faintly. "Whether you did or not, you know in your heart. They also know in their hearts." That minister had already seen everything clearly from upstairs. He grabbed Helian Vivian's sleeve. "Miss Helian Vivian, this old man is begging you. In this world, only you can detoxify this poison. This old man is left with only one woman. Please do a good deed, do a good deed." When the rest of the students heard this, they also looked at Helian Vivian. The fear of death made them show an unprecedented panic. What they regretted the most was listening to Helian Jiao and Helian Mai's words and joining hands to attack Helian Vivian. Usually, they looked down on this woman the most. But today, whether they lived or died was in her hand. With such a big thing happening, the retired emperor couldn't be indifferent. The poisoned people were the descendants of the court officials. He had to come over. But when he heard Helian Vivian's words, he felt that it was tricky. This girl was different from everyone he had met. In her eyes, there was no such thing as imperial power. Therefore, even the retired emperor had to soften his tone. Wei, this emperor will naturally uphold justice for them. However, even if this bone-eroding poison is cured, the ones who will suffer will be those of the older generation. Helian Vivian glanced at the retired emperor and said in a flat tone, "I won't help those who look down on me and even want to frame me. That year, my mother went beyond the Great Wall alone and saved the hostages of several families. When she died, those people didn't even say a single word of thanks to her." As she spoke, her gaze swept over the crowd inch by inch. "Not only that, they even took the opportunity to step on you a few times." The people who were chosen by Helian Vivian couldn't help but tremble. Out of the 10 people, 3 of them were the descendants of the participants from that year. Helian Vivian looked at them with a sneer. "In this world, there is always a need to pay attention to karma. It's not that there isn't retribution, it's just that the time hasn't come yet." When the ministers heard the last sentence, they repented and took a step back. However, they didn't dare to speak of the matter of that year. They were afraid that it would affect their own careers. But when they saw the ashen faces of their grandchildren, the 3 ministers felt so uncomfortable that they almost died. They were their flesh and blood. "Since you hate us so much, why did you detoxify us just now?" The minister's face was ashen, as if he had aged more than 10 years. Helian Vivian walked over and smiled like a demon. "Didn't you also treat me like this in the past?" The ministers weren't stupid. When they heard this sentence, they understood Helian Vivian's meaning. She did it on purpose. She deliberately saved them and let them watch their grandchildren's lives in danger, but they were helpless. "Woman, you are really ruthless." However, Yuan Ming's thin lips curved up. "I like it." The more ruthless and ingenious the revenge, the more his demonic nature would expand. Before long, he would be able to recover all of his vitality. That would be the best. Helian Vivian wasn't affected in the slightest. She raised a hand and slowly tied her sleeve. "I said before, since they want to join hands to teach me a lesson, of course I have to give them a little gift in return. Sister Wei, you don't have to save the 3 of them. We have never framed Madame Helian." One of the poisoned people looked at Helian Vivian in a flattering manner. "Sister Wei is the most clear-minded, you definitely won't involve the innocent." Helian Vivian looked at her and suddenly smiled. "Oh? Then you guys challenged me one by one, it wasn't framing me?" That person's expression stiffened. In order to survive, she simply pointed at Helian Mai and Helian Jiao at the side and said, "This is all their idea. We were just instructed by others, Sister Wei, this is really not what we want to do." "Ling what nonsense are you talking about?" Helian Jiao, whose scheme had been exposed, instantly had some unnatural panic. However, earlier on, when everyone fell down one after another, she already knew that there was something fishy going on. Because of these fishy things, she thought of an exceptionally excellent method that could put Wei Wei to death. She pressed her painful mouth and said with a guiding voice, "Ling don't be led away by others. Don't you think it's strange? There is obviously no antidote for bone erosion. Why does Big Sister have the antidote?" When the ministers heard this, they knew that something was wrong. They wanted to speak up to stop Hellion Jiao. However, Hellion Vivian said, "Shut up, let her continue." The ministers were anxious, but they did not dare to move. They were afraid that if Hellion Vivian was unhappy, she would not save their grandson. Hellion Jiao cautiously glanced at that official and swallowed her words back into her stomach. "I've finished speaking. Eldest sister, don't take it too seriously. I'm only curious. There are so many people in this martial arts competition, yet you're the only one with the antidote for the bone-corroding poison." Hearing this, many people looked at Hellion Vivian suspiciously. Hellion Vivian coldly curved her thin lips. "You want to say that this poison was put by me, so that's why I have the antidote?" "Big sister." Hellion Jiao pretended to be surprised. "That's what you said, I don't mean that." Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. "Is that so? But it's a pity that I don't have the antidote. It's just that the martial chi I cultivate is special, so I know the antidote for bone erosion. You can continue to frame me, but you're just wasting these people's time." After saying this, everyone looked at Hellion Jiao with condemnation in their eyes. Even the ministers were anxious. "Hellion Jiao, can you not be so nosy? Saving people is more important." Hellion Jiao had never been disliked like this before. Her face was pale, and she bit her thin lips and insisted, "I just think it's strange. Speaking of which, I have something I want to ask you." Chapter 247. Hellion Wei Wei strolled over, her eyes gleaming. "I've noticed since just now that you've always liked the tea at Phoenix Restaurant, and you're a regular customer here. This time, not only did you bring your own cup, you even asked the servant girl to bring you a pot of water." Having heard what was said, Hellion Jiao's entire body froze. She originally wanted to use the bone-eroding poison as a final counterattack. Because she really lost face today. Not only did she lose to this slut in the martial chi competition, but she also fell to the point where she was despised because of her. This was even more unbearable than killing her. However, she didn't expect that Hellion Vivian would notice these details. She suddenly felt a sense of regret as if she had slapped herself in the face. The retired emperor was very smart. When he heard this, he frowned and was furious. What exactly is going on? Hellion Jiao had long forgotten that the retired emperor was here. At this time, she realized the seriousness of the problem. She was so scared that her body trembled. She knelt on the ground and reached out to pull the maid beside her. The maid trembled and said, It's because Miss is not feeling well recently and it's not suitable for her to drink tea." This servant prepared a pot of water. As for the rest, this servant really doesn't know anything. That's too much of a coincidence. Today's poisoning was obviously planned. Your miss is not feeling well at this time and it's not suitable for her to drink tea, so she brought her own cup and water and acted like she didn't know anything. Hellion Vivian smiled faintly and moved closer to the maid's face. "Tell me, do you think people will believe such a story?" Of course they wouldn't believe it. No one was a fool, especially those ministers who were anxious to save people. The way they looked at Hellion Jiao had completely changed. The retired emperor glared at Hellion Jiao with anger in his eyes. Hellion Jiao panicked in her heart and looked at Hellion Mai, who was lying on the ground in unbearable pain. Suddenly, she thought of something. Retired emperor is wise. If Jiao really knew something, then my younger sister wouldn't have been poisoned. Hellion Mai groaned in pain. She didn't have the strength to speak and listened to the ins and outs of the matter. A wave of hatred rushed to her head. No. Second sister was lying. She knew that the tea was poisonous, so her mother asked them to bring their own teapots. However, she didn't tell him anything and just watched as he drank the tea. However, she had no way to expose her. Hellion Mai knew better than anyone else that if she spoke now, it would implicate her mother. That was something she didn't want to see, therefore, she could only swallow her hatred. However, what Hellion Jiao didn't notice was that Hellion Mai was looking at her in a different light. At this point, it was impossible to find out who had poisoned him. The ministers were not interested in finding out who poisoned them. All they wanted was for Hellion Wei to detoxify their grandchildren as soon as possible. However, it was clear that Hellion Vivian had no intention of making a move. This made the retired emperor ponder for a moment before he said, Wei, tell me, what do you want to detoxify them? As long as they admit to their crimes and reveal the mastermind behind it. Hellion Vivian smiled, making everyone hold their breath. This was impossible. 3 of the ministers had ugly expressions on their faces. The others were indignant. Lord Yuan, Lord Li, do you want these children to go to hell because of the crimes you committed? The ministers still didn't speak. Once they spoke, it wouldn't just be the death of a grandson or granddaughter, but the entire family would be implicated. Hellion Jiaoer was afraid that they would be swayed and turned her head to look at Wei. Eldest sister, no matter what, these people are still your schoolmates. Are you really going to watch them die and not save them? Younger sister. Hellion Wei looked at Hellion Jiaoer and suddenly laughed. Speaking of which, these things all happened because of you. If it wasn't because you wanted to find someone to join hands with to teach me a lesson, they also wouldn't have used their martial qi to such an extent. You're the main culprit, how can you remove yourself so cleanly? Hellion Jiaoer was completely speechless by Hellion Vivian's words. Hellion Wei saw that those ministers didn't speak, her thin lips curved into a half smile. The 3 lords are used to being heartless and unscrupulous, even disregarding the life of their own grandsons, then don't blame me for not saving them. As for the other 7, whether they can live or not, it will depend on this younger sister's attitude. What I hate the most is that evil people who obviously did something evil but still pretend to be innocent. As long as Hellion Jiaoer kneels down and kowtows to me 3 times, and personally says what I just instructed you, I will save them. From the beginning, Hellion Vivian had said that compared to killing people, Hellion Jiaoer would be more painful to be skinned in front of so many people, so that her ugliness wouldn't be able to hide. Hellion Jiaoer covered her swollen face and continued to weep in denial. Eldest sister, why do you have to be so ruthless towards me? You have repeatedly found people to frame me. Isn't that cruel? Hellion Vivian looked at her indifferently. Or do you want to leave me in the lurch for the sake of your own reputation? When everyone heard this, they all looked at Hellion Jiaoer. Under great pressure, Hellion Jiaoer could only clench her teeth and put on a brave face. I didn't mean that. Then kowtow and admit your mistake. Hellion Vivian's eyes fell on her body like icicles. Hellion Jiaoer bent her knees little by little and bit her lips so hard that they bled. Bang! 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 3 kowtows. Hellion Jiaoer couldn't wait to leave after kowtowing. Hellion Vivian looked a little indifferent. You haven't told me why they only pointed at me when I stood on the stage. Yes, I asked them to do so. Hellion Jiaoer took a deep breath and her voice was as soft as a mosquito's buzzing. Hellion Vivian smiled. It seems that younger sister is still not sincere enough. You didn't say it clearly and still hummed. You. Hellion Jiaoer clenched her hands and looked like she couldn't wait to pounce on Hellion Vivian and bite her to death. However, the ministers were really anxious. Miss Jiaoer, speak louder, speak more clearly. My granddaughter's life is in your hand. Hellion Jiaoer had no choice but to close her eyes tightly and say, the reason why these people chose you when they went up was because I asked them to do so. As she spoke, she cried again, wanting to gain more sympathy from others. We didn't violate the rules of the competition. This shouldn't be enough to punish me. Elder sister asked me to apologize, so I apologized. She asked me to kowtow, so I kowtowed. As long as you can save everyone, we can talk about anything. Hellion Jiaoer was beautiful to begin with. When she cried like this, there was a little bit of weeping beauty that made people unable to bear to see her weak. Many people began to soften and looked at Hellion Jiaoer with a little sympathy in their eyes. At this time, a cold and indifferent voice slowly sounded. It was low and deep and very pleasant to the ears. Almost instantly, it caught everyone's ears. Chapter 248. Now that I think about it, you do have a little bit of credit. Everyone turned their heads. They saw Beligaju walking over from a distance. His black robes fluttered in the wind, looking indolent and sexy. He looked like a noble young master who had just walked out of a painting. His eyes were cold and indifferent. There was a faint light in his eyes, 10% affectionate and 90% emotionless. His thin lips were curled up, and he wore a silver mask on his face. His long black hair fluttered in the wind, giving people a feeling that he was both good and evil. Then, he tilted his head, bit off the white gloves on his hands, and gently spat them to the side. This kind of Beligaju was often the most deadly. It was easy for him to win the infatuation of young girls. But those who were familiar with him knew that whenever he entered this state, it was time to deal with people. He never showed mercy when he whipped corpses. Also, there was one more thing. His methods were very special. From the moment she saw Beligaju appear, the Hellion Jiao's thoughts were in chaos. Her heartbeat quickened as she brushed the strands of hair by her ear. She raised her watery eyes and looked at Beligaju affectionately. "Your Highness." She thought that this kind of attitude would make her look more innocent and pitiful. After all, His Highness had always liked this kind of girl. Didn't that lowly servant girl from before rely on this to make His Highness take her seriously? The current situation was an excellent opportunity for her. Thinking about it carefully, this person had never paid attention to her before. Today was the first time that His Highness had spoken to her. The Hellion Jiao felt that her chance had finally come. She was about to say something. She then heard Bailey Jiaoju continue, "Other than you, I have rarely seen anyone who is so self-righteous after murdering someone. However, since you feel that you have contributed, I will reward you with something." The Hellion Jiao stuttered and opened her mouth. At this time, she realized that Beligaju didn't even look at her. "Eunuch son, give the order." Beligaju's gaze lightly swept over the crowd, his voice was devilishly cold. "From today onwards, the Hui Manor will have 2 concubines. Tell them to prepare an additional betrothal gift and send it to Madame Su, do you understand?" Eunuch Sun was stunned at first, then hesitantly looked at the retired emperor's expression. He saw that the retired emperor didn't have any objections. He nodded and said, "Yes. His Highness, how is this a reward? This is simply sending people to their deaths." Moreover, he was still mentioning the betrothal gifts. Was he doing this on purpose? Hellion Vivian also felt that it was a little strange to mention the betrothal gift at this time. She couldn't help but glance at Beligaju. His Highness, on the other hand, was as cold as ice from beginning to end. He was so cold and indifferent that no one could guess what he was thinking. "Your Highness," Hellion Jiao cried out with a pale face, how could you? Beligaju coldly raised his eyebrows. "You want to defy the decree?" I Hellion Jiao looked at the ministers with a panicked expression. The ministers were more or less afraid of the elders of the 4 great families. They knew that they especially valued Hellion Jiao, so they spoke up, "Your Highness, it's not good to bestow such a hasty marriage. If Prime Minister Su and the people of the general's residence know." Wei. Beligaju didn't wait for them to finish speaking. Instead, he called out Hellion Vivian's name with his thin lips half curved. Hellion Vivian hummed in response. Thinking about it carefully, this seemed to be the first time a certain highness called her name. Why did that tone sound like he was ordering a cat or a dog? It was just that the ending tone was a little soft, which made it hard to refuse. "Take note of him. See who among the poisoned people is his grandson. Just let them die." Beligaju's tone was very indifferent. It was this kind of indifference that made the minister's hair stand on end from the bottom of their heart. The entire venue fell into a dead silence. No one dared to open their mouths again, afraid that the royal family would make an example out of them. Only Hellion Vivian responded with a light smile, "Okay." She looked like she wasn't afraid of Beligaju at all, lazily curling her lips. The 2 people stood upright under the setting sun. One was as cold as a fairy, the other had a faint smile like a devil. It looked like they complemented each other a little. However, it was like this that the 2 people joined forces, which made people a little breathless. Originally, Hellion Vivian alone was enough to make the ministers fearful. Now, there was the addition of the royal family. The ministers looked at each other, cold sweat dripping down their foreheads. When the Hellion Jiao saw that the situation was not right, she swallowed the blood in her mouth and forced a smile. Jiao doesn't have any intention of disobeying the decree. It's just that young Master Huai has already married third sister. I'm afraid that if we do this, third sister will feel uncomfortable. As she spoke, Helian Jiao turned towards Helian Mai, whose face had turned green, and looked over. What she wanted was for her to say a few words. This kind of singing and matching, maybe she could help her out of this predicament. After all, they used to cooperate like this. However, what she didn't expect was, Helian Mai unexpectedly laughed. Her voice was so deep and hoarse that it made people who heard it feel extremely terrifying. Second older sister is truly overthinking things. How could I feel uncomfortable? You and I have been together since we were young. If we can also live together in the future, then that couldn't be better. You can rest assured that after you marry over, you won't need to come to my house every day to offer tea. Even if you become a concubine, I will still let my husband take care of you a bit more. Hearing this, the Helian Jiao widened her eyes as if she had seen a ghost. Third sister, are you crazy? Second sister, why are you so agitated? Helian Mai looked at her coldly. What you meant just now, could it be that if I agreed, you would comply with the imperial edict and marry me? Because of Helian Mai's words, the Helian Jiao could no longer maintain her image. Regardless of who was around, she stood up and shouted, Helian Mai, you are crazy. You are really crazy. Who wants to marry a eunuch? You are asking for it. Who told you to have a secret relationship with Huaiyan? How can I compare to you? I am the treasure in the hands of father and mother. How can you drag me into this? It turns out that second sister thinks of me like this. Helian Mai spilled blood from the corner of her mouth. Now, you, the treasure, will fall into hell with me. Second sister, don't worry, when we go to the Huai family, I will repay you well. Hearing Helian Mai's words, the Helian Jiao really didn't understand what happened to her. Could it be? Was it because of that cup of tea? After Helian Jiao reacted, she turned to look at Helian Mai again. Her familiar gaze disappeared and was replaced by a hatred that corroded the bones and penetrated the flesh. Third sister, listen to me. Chapter 249. I'd like to hear your explanation. Helian Vivian smiled. Helian Jiao swallowed the words that were about to come out of her mouth. She looked at Helian Vivian as if she was looking at a grim reaper who had just walked out of hell. Who are you? You're definitely not Helian Vivian. Helian Jiao was on the verge of collapse as she roared. If it was that woman, how could she possibly force her to this point? Now, not only did she lose her face, but she was also hated by her closest younger sister. The most frightening thing was that she was actually going to marry an impotent man. That would spoil her. She had worked so hard for so many years, how could she fall to this point? You've changed since you woke up last time. Tell me, who are you? Helian Jiao clenched her hands as she looked at Helian Vivian with hatred and fear. Murong Chang Feng pulled her. Jiao, calm down. If they continued to quarrel like this, the retired emperor might really betroth her to Huaiyan. If that happened, it would inevitably weaken the power of the four great clans. However, at this moment, Helian Jiao seemed to have been bewitched. She flung his hand aside and pointed at Helian Wei, saying, Lord, don't tell me you're not curious. This woman. In the past, she clearly only knew how to chase you everywhere. Now, she's like a completely different person. Don't even mention chasing you. Even if you take the initiative to reconcile with her, she wouldn't even spare you a glance. How could the previous love-struck fool do such a thing? Helian Jiao, that's enough. Murong Chang Feng was exposed on the spot, so his expression naturally didn't look good. Helian Jiao refused to give up. Her eyes were fixed on Helian Vivian. Helian Vivian curled her thin lips into a faint smile. I haven't changed. It's just that this death made me completely understand what you've taken away from me all these years. As she spoke, she slowly walked towards Helian Jiao and said, I've said it before. I'll take back what belongs to me, little by little. Helian Jiao, do you think this is the end? How naive. At that moment, Helian Jiao seemed to see the shadow floating behind her. It was like a demon coming for her life. The faintly discernible silver hair scared Helian Jiao so much that she fell heavily to the ground. What the hell was that? Just as the Helian Jiao was about to take a closer look, a voice suddenly rang out. Then the silver hair disappeared. It was as if everything that had happened just now was just an illusion. But even so, it was enough to make Hellion Jiao's hair stand on end. Hellion Vivian bent down. Her figure was cold and handsome. She said softly in her ear, "Don't forget, your mother hasn't been pulled down by me. You. Hellion Jiao's fingers trembled. She was so angry that a mouthful of blood overflowed from her throat. Hellion Vivian pulled on her collar and smiled faintly. "Why is it so bloody? Where's your fairy image? Don't you want it anymore? Oh, right. You're going to marry a eunuch. You're not in the mood to pretend anymore." Lian. Wei. Hellion Jiao coughed heavily as her blood rushed to her heart. However, Wei acted as if she didn't hear anything and stood up straight. She used a handkerchief to wipe the bloodstains on her fingers and casually threw that handkerchief onto Hellion Jiao's body. That casual action was exactly the same as Belegaju's. Eunuch Sun couldn't help but look at his master. Yet, that person's thin lips were curled up, and the light in his eyes unexpectedly revealed a kind of increasingly dripping coldness. His tone was very indifferent as he indifferently ordered, "Eunuch Sun, go make arrangements to let second Miss Hellion enter the family earlier." "Yes." Eunuch Sun bowed his head and accepted the order. Hellion Jiao's body stiffened. She was like a prisoner who was sentenced to death. Her whole body went limp on the ground. Hellion Vivian looked at this scene. Her thin lips curved slightly. Next. It was that pair of scumbag man and bitch. Hellion Guang Yarrow and Su Yang Mo. Thinking of this, Hellion Vivian quickly walked forward. She didn't forget that she had promised the ministers to detoxify the poison. As she walked, she ordered, "Bring out all the tubs from earlier. We'll start detoxifying the poison now." The guards hurriedly replied, "Yes." They prepared everything according to the previous method. They set up firewood, made a fire, and steamed the wooden tubs. Sitting on the second floor, the man in white looked at the noise below. His fingers that were spinning the teacup paused. A trace of light flashed in his emotionless eyes. "Master." The shadow landed and looked sideways at the window. The other party's actions are too fast. Their shadows have already begun to search the surrounding tea houses. "We have to leave immediately." The man in white stood up and looked downstairs again. His eyes fell on Hellion Vivian. "Go and check her information again. Find out when she started to change." "Master, are you suspecting that she's not Hellion Vivian?" The shadow raised an eyebrow. The man in white walked down the stairs, and the shadow fell on his face. Only his deep voice could be heard faintly. "I still don't believe that anyone can make such a big change in such a short time, unless there was something behind it." The man didn't continue. The light fell. Hellion Vivian, who was meditating, retracted her hand. Among the 10 people, 7 of them had returned to normal. The remaining 3 were taken home. No matter how the imperial physicians treated them, they all shook their heads. Some people said that those who were poisoned by the bone-eroding poison wouldn't survive a day. Some people said that this was self-inflicted. In order not to affect their power, they chose to hide the truth and sacrificed the lives of their grandson and granddaughter. They deserved it. Therefore, this time, no one said anything about Hellion Vivian. Because through this incident, everyone clearly realized one thing, that is, Hellion Wei really was no longer the trash that everyone could step on once or twice. First place in the martial chi competition. This meant that she was very likely to be a genius more powerful than Hellion Jiao. Up until now, no one had been able to tell what the attribute of her martial chi was. However, she had indeed won the competition. What those elders of the Hellion clan regretted the most right now was that they had driven her out of the clan. Otherwise, the current honor would definitely belong to them. How could the smart Hellion Vivian not see through their thoughts? When she reached out and took the first place silver box from the elder's hand, her face carried a faint ridicule. That elder gave Hellion Vivian a rare smile and was about to say something. A group of embroidered uniform guards walked over in a grandiose manner. They reached out and placed more than 10 boxes of gold in front of Hellion Vivian. That kind of extravagance almost made everyone gasp in surprise. Who has the money to do this? More than 10 boxes of gold in one go. Hellion Vivian subconsciously looked towards Beligaju. Chapter 250. The look in her eyes seemed to be saying, "What is the meaning of this?" Beligaju looked at her. His voice was very light, but it was difficult to hide his innate grace and magnificence. Betrothal gift. Betrothal gift. Everyone was stunned. They almost suspected that there was something wrong with their ears. At this time, people remembered that the famous third prince had chosen a consort not long ago. It seemed that he had said that whoever won this martial chi competition would be chosen as his consort. But, even if Hellion Vivian was no longer a waste, with her appearance, they all thought that the royal would use this as an excuse to reject the marriage. Unexpectedly, the royal actually ordered people to send more than a dozen boxes of gold to Hellion Vivian, and they even said that they were betrothal gift. What a shocking bolt of lightning! Everyone looked at the glittering gold wooden boxes and was already a little dumbfounded. Could it be that whoever married into the royal family would have this much gold? Heavens! What kind of luck did Hellion Vivian have? Hellion Vivian was also a little unable to react, but what made her dumbfounded was not the pile of gold, but a certain highness's obsession with the betrothal gift. Since the start of the martial arts competition, a certain highness seemed to be competing with the word betrothal gift. Hellion Vivian wrinkled her willowy eyebrows, inevitably a little hesitant. This kind of hesitation, in Beligaju's eyes, changed its appearance, the corners of his mouth slowly rising into a smile. That smile was a little cold, reflected in his deep peach blossom eyes. At first glance, it gave people a feeling of evil and seductive. What? You don't want to accept it? It's not that I don't want to accept it. Hellion Vivian was quite distressed. It's that I don't know what to use as a dowry. After saying that, Hellion Vivian felt a little uncomfortable. She had never thought that one day she would have to discuss betrothal gift and dowry with a man in public with so many people. Sure enough, when she raised her head, the royal's expression was a little stunned. Since they had already talked about it, Hellion Vivian didn't care anymore. "I'll make it up to your highness before the wedding." Bailey Jiu hummed in acknowledgement, with a faint evil aura that only she could see. Hellion Vivian felt her cheeks inexplicably warm. If she had known, she wouldn't have asked anything and silently accepted it. Looking at Hellion Vivian's appearance, Murong Changfeng, who was standing below the stage, firmly clenched his fists. She was going to get married. He wasn't her husband. All this time, he didn't know what Hellion Vivian meant to him. He really hated her pestering him, but he didn't want her to pester others. If he hadn't annulled the engagement back then, wouldn't he have been the one to become her husband? Once this idea was formed, Murong Changfeng's heart felt as if there were countless ants crawling inside, unspeakably stifling. The retired emperor was overjoyed. He said good 3 times in a row, then turned his head and ordered, "Go and inform the general's residence that the wedding will be held in 10 days. 10 days. Wouldn't it be a little rushed?" Everyone looked at each other. This was completely forcing the marriage. Presumably, the reason why the royal family wanted to marry Hellion Vivian was also because of the retired emperor. Not only did the unimportant people think so, even the death warriors from Ghost Palace also thought so. By my, let's fly down and get rid of this woman for his highness. A woman dressed in black hid in a corner, her eyes flashing with jealousy. The woman called By my pulled the woman in black and lightly shook her head. "No, Heiju. You will ruin his highness's plan. But to let such an ugly woman into the palace, his highness is obviously unwilling." Heiju clenched the long sword in her hand. By my frowned. "No one can make his highness do things that he is unwilling to do. During this time, we haven't been by his highness's side, so we don't know the situation. So Heiju, don't interfere in this matter. But his highness clearly only has sister in his heart. There is no reason for him to choose a dark and ugly woman. Moreover, you just saw her methods, that kind of vicious and vicious. His highness will not like this kind of woman." Heiju said angrily and wanted to fly down. Shadow's figure moved and blocked in front of her. His eyes were calm. "By my is right. No one can make his highness do things that he is unwilling to do. I advise you, it's best to put away your thoughts. Don't mention the past in front of the princess." Even if His Highness cares about these 10 years of old, he still doesn't like anyone to talk too much. Moreover, this time, His Highness called you back to protect the princess before the wedding, regardless of day or night. Princess? Heiju sneered, she is not worthy of being a princess. After saying that, she turned around and walked away. That kind of contemptuous look made Shadow unable to help but to focus. In the crowd, no one noticed that just under the crowded stage, a man in a white robe narrowed his eyes slightly. When he looked at Hellion Vivian, there was a dark light in his eyes. Seemingly having noticed this extremely strong presence, Wei Wei abruptly turned her head around, only to see within the enthusiastic crowd, a man in white fluttering clothes lightly turned around, only leaving behind an ink-splashed back view like water. After half an hour. The general's residence. Hellion Guang Yarrow was certain that Hellion Jiao would win, so he didn't rush to the scene. Shock flashed across his face, making his entire face look somewhat stiff. Inconceivable, unimaginable, but absolutely not a pleasant surprise. Eunuch Sun held a white horsetail whisk in one hand and the imperial edict in the other. After he finished reading, the corners of his mouth were still smiling. After seeing Hellion Guang Yarrow's reaction, he was slightly stunned, but quickly smiled and said, "Congratulations, my lord, this time the general's residence is a double blessing, all 3 daughters are going to be married, how rare." But Su Yang Mo did not seem to hear what Eunuch Sun said next. Her fingers were firmly pressed on the maid's arm, even the muscles on her face were stiff. "This is impossible, how can Jiao lose? This is impossible." Saying that, she raised her head, "Eunuch Sun, this imperial edict is not wrong, how can the retired emperor, how can he betroth Jiao to a eunuch?" Su Yang Mo always knew how to hide her emotions, but today, she questioned the authenticity of the imperial edict, even her voice was sharp and harsh. This was simply not like her. The daughter she raised with care was now going to be married to a eunuch, how could she accept this? Su Yang Mo held her head dizzily, the maid standing next to her quickly reached out to support her. Eunuch Sun's expression was indifferent as he held the imperial edict, listening to Madame Su's words. "Are you blaming the retired emperor?" "Eunuch Sun, my wife definitely did not mean that." Hellion Guang Yarrow quickly opened his mouth to explain, but his heart felt like it was being crushed by a huge rock. He did not expect that things would turn out like this. Chapter 251. Eunuch Sun was a smart person, he could see through the 2 people's thoughts at a glance. He had taken a lot of money from Hellion Guang Yarrow on a daily basis, plus he thought that this was their princess's father, so he said a few words to Hellion Guang Yarrow. "My lord, it's not that I'm being nosy, but this is your blood, you can't be too biased. Be careful not to try and bring disaster upon you." "Eunuch Sun is right, Eunuch Sun is right." Hellion Guang Yarrow forced a smile, but his heart was already surging with waves of emotions. After Eunuch Sun left, only then did Hellion Guang Yarrow fall heavily onto the wooden chair. Su Yang Mo pushed the maid away fiercely. "My lord, our Jiao must not marry into the Huai residence. You think we can't just because you say so? That's the imperial edict of the retired emperor." Hellion Guang Yarrow also roared, then sighed deeply. "Forget it, since things have come to this, we can only bring her back." "You want to bring that little bitch back?" Su Yang Mo gritted her teeth. "My lord, you have to understand, if it wasn't for her, our Jiao would not have fallen to this point. Now you want to bring her back?" Bang! Hellion Guang Yarrow slammed the teacup in his hand. "Are you done? Do you think I want to bring her back?" Hellion Guang Yarrow's face looked more than 10 times gloomier than usual. "Once she comes back, it's very likely that those who follow the wind will change their minds. Don't forget, the hidden army left behind by the old master is still there. Before he died, he specifically told those people that if Hellion Vivian can stay in the family until she is 16 years old, this hidden army will appear again and help her fight for the family's power. But what can I do now? Don't let her come back. She is now the champion of the martial chi competition and is going to marry into the royal family. Not to mention those elders, even the ministers in the court will use this matter to bury me. The matter of me taking charge of the military will also be completely out of the question." As he spoke, Hellion Guang Yarrow calmed down and said, "Go ask the Prime Minister if he can say anything about Jiao's marriage. These days, you've been watching that girl. When did she get martial qi? Su Yang Mo shook her head and felt her body go weak. She had never thought that the little bastard would still have a trick up his sleeve right under her nose. Logically speaking, her martial qi should have been completely broken. How could it still be there today? Furthermore, the people sent by the elders had told her that they had already gotten rid of her. How did she survive and appear in the martial qi competition? It was as if he couldn't be killed no matter how hard he tried. She didn't seem like the Hellion Vivian she was familiar with at all. Master, I keep feeling that there's something strange about that little bitch. Su Yang Mo fiddled with the prayer beads in her hand. She wasn't like this in the past. She changed completely after she fell into the water that day. Do you think something happened that day that we don't know about? This is indeed strange. Hellion Guang Yarrow also didn't understand how his money-losing daughter became so powerful all of a sudden. Su Yang Mo's eyes narrowed, emitting a faint venomous light. Looking at her appearance, she doesn't seem to be an imposter. Instead, her personality has changed. When I was young, I heard people say that there was a fox fairy possessing a body. Fox spirit possessing a body? You're saying that she's very likely to be possessed by an evil spirit? Hellion Guang Yarrow raised his eyebrows, a glimmer of light flashed in his eyes. Yes. Su Yang Mo lowered her eyes, bursting with poisonous light. If that's the case, then not only will she not be able to return to the general's residence, she will also be thrown into the dungeon and interrogated by the priests. In the Dragon War Empire, no one will allow a possessed person to marry into the royal family and become a princess. As long as this matter is exposed at the right time, Master, you won't have to worry about that hidden army. Hellion Guang Yarrow sat up straight. You're thinking of during her wedding? She caused so much harm to our Jiao and she wants to marry into the royal family happily. Ha, dream on. Jiao has been in love with the royal family since she was young. It should be Jiao who gets married. It's that little bitch who doesn't know what's good for her, so don't blame me for being ruthless. Catcher. Hellion Vivian finished the last piece of armament and displayed it on the table. Her lips curled into a smile. She would give this to the royal family as a return gift. She stood up and stretched. As she walked out, she yawned. She looked at the black and white people standing outside and said, "You two go back to the Imperial Palace and tell the third prince that I have something to discuss with him." Bai Mai was about to nod. The gorgeous Heiju sneered. "Eldest miss, you should focus on preparing the betrothal gifts. His Highness must be busy and can't find the time. If there's anything, wait until you see His Highness." Hearing this, Hellion Vivian slowly narrowed her eyes and looked at her with her arms crossed. She didn't say anything and only curved her lips into a smile. Seeing this, Bai Mai reached out and touched Heiju, wanting her to be more careful. Heiju still kept her chin up. Bai Mai took a step forward. His Highness is indeed busy. After the retired emperor was poisoned, His Highness has been investigating this matter. But if the princess is looking for His Highness should rush over. I will go and inform His Highness. Hellion Vivian looked at her lazily and didn't speak. Heiju began to speak in a strange tone. Bai Mai, our task is to protect the eldest miss. We are not at His Highness's command. We are His Highness's maids. If we do something that doesn't suit our status, it will cause trouble for His Highness. Bai Mai felt that this was too much. But Hellion Vivian opened her mouth. Her voice was faint and unfathomable. Eunuch Sun, I can't order His Highness's people. Why don't you go there personally? Eunuch Sun's scalp was numb. After a few days of getting along, he knew better than anyone that although the princess looked like she didn't sit properly, she was indeed elegant and intelligent. If you don't provoke her, she is always polite to people. But if you provoke her, Eunuch Sun thought about the fate of those people before and inexplicably shuddered. When he looked at Heiju, he frowned. Heiju was still disdainful. Obviously, she thought that Hellion Vivian was afraid of her. When Eunuch Sun saw this, he couldn't help but find it funny. Afraid? This princess was not even afraid of His Highness. Why would she be afraid of a death soldier? Putting aside the conspiracy and calculation, just her way of doing things was not moving. She was not angry and directly asked him to go. Don't think that by doing this, She was gentle. That was because she was too lazy to fight with a maid. What kind of person was His Highness? How could he not understand the princess's meaning? This was clearly saying, I can't even use the people you sent me. Hurry up and go back to where you came from. Chapter 252. Arju, we're about to get married. After discussing business, Nangong Lai put down the teacup in his hand and smiled evilly. How do you feel? Finally caught the prey. This guy won't lose interest in this, right? Bailey Jiaju only sneered as he sat on the wooden chair. His posture was much more hostile than usual. He reached out and loosened his collar. The corners of his mouth were full of mockery. You can also try to get married once. Don't. Nangong Lai coughed heavily. Don't you think about me. I'm not like the He family's young master who fooled around with the prey you set your eyes on. The two of them even got some gold card, one engraved with Wei, the other engraved with Ze. You're not stupid. Belegaju's tone was indifferent as he stood up and strolled to the side of the mural. With a wave of his long sleeve, the mural slowly moved away from the middle, revealing the beautiful and luxurious cage bed inside. Belegaju laughed. Look again, you're not really going to put her on this on the day of the wedding, are you? Maybe. Belegaju lazily said. Nangong Lai shook his head and laughed. That's right, this is the first time a woman can enter your eyes. It's not strange that you promoted her to a house pet. You can go. Belegaju moved his eyes from the cage bed and looked at Nangong Lai. Don't dirty my place. Nangong Lai was speechless. I'm telling you, Arju, you can't be like this. Think about it, if you wait until she marries and you still dislike her for being dirty, then you won't even have a wedding night. Hey, by the way, speaking of which, will you touch that woman? You should touch her. Last time you said that you were very interested in her. Bailey Jiaju no longer paid any attention to him. Instead, he shifted his gaze back to the cage bed. He thought that the person who only knew how to stretch her claws at him was about to move in. The corners of his mouth slightly curled up, revealing a trace of a smile. Nangong Lai still wanted to say something, but Eunuch Sun's report came in from outside. When Belegaju heard Eunuch Sun's words, a faint light appeared in his cold eyes, as if he was pondering something. Nangong Lai also laughed, the corners of his mouth curled up with evil intentions. He was indeed worthy of being their boss, he even had such a way to deal with the people around Arju. In his opinion, things would definitely be interesting later on. He really wanted to follow them to watch the show, but, before Arju left, he actually threw all the tasks to him. Why was he always the one who had to work so hard? Nangong Lai took the seal and stamped it one by one with resentment. Suddenly, his eyes lit up. Speaking of which, Arju is about to get married. As a good friend for so many years, how can I not give him a big gift? Young Master Lai, you better not provoke His Highness anymore. The little attendant beside Nangong Lai thought to himself, His Highness is in a good mood recently. He didn't kick you, but you can't always be so reckless. Nangong Lai smiled wickedly at the little attendant. What's wrong? Do you feel sorry for your master? My master now is you. The little attendant lowered her eyes, and her long eyelashes fell down. It was not difficult to see her true gender. Nangong Lai smiled coldly. It's good that you can recognize your identity. The little attendant did not speak. Nangong Lai held his chin and said in a deep voice, Don't worry, Arju will definitely like the gift I give him. As he said, he reached out and trapped the little attendant on the desk. For example, what you used on me, I will use it on Hellion Vivian. What do you think? The little attendant bit her lips. What? Nangong Lai reached out and pushed her long hair away. Where did your courage go? You dare to go to my bed, but you don't dare to look at me. The little attendant's face was hot, but her eyes were firm. This matter has nothing to do with His Highness and the princess. It's my own fault. You also know that it's your fault. Nangong Lai reached out and lifted her chin. His tone was cold, then don't talk too much. The little attendant did not want to cause any unhappiness between Master Lai and His Highness because of her fault. If only she did not like the person in front of her. She knew that the prodigy priest was unattainable, but she still had thoughts that she should not have. The little attendant sighed in her heart as she stared fixedly at Qin Wentian. It was because she wanted him too much that their relationship had entered a dead end. It was all her fault. What are you thinking about? Do you think it's better to stay with me than with our Jew? Nangong Lai sneered and leaned over, biting the little attendant's lips directly. At dusk, in a corner of the academy, Hellion Vivian was lying lazily on the grass, basking in the sun, and her face was covered with an ancient book. She realized that someone was coming over. She did not move. She was too lazy to get up, so she simply listened to the sound. Your Highness, why are you here? This is against the rules. Her skirt flashed, and her black hair bloomed in front of Beligaju like a flower. There was obvious surprise and joy on her gorgeous little face. Beligaju turned his head and glanced at her. His eyes were extremely cold. Heiju was stunned, and there was a lot of chill in her heart. She did not dare to speak more, and directly lowered her eyes. Shadow, take her away. Bailey Jiaoju's voice didn't seem to have any ripples, indifferent as usual. Heiju's expression was stiff in an instant, and she looked at Beligaju in disbelief. She did not expect that His Highness would punish her like this for such a woman, and Ying did not care about her expression, and took her away as usual. He took the thorny wooden stick and sighed slightly. Heiju, since His Highness has agreed to choose the princess, no matter why he chose her, she must be treated with respect. It's you who broke the rules. Heiju gritted her teeth and endured the punishment of the stick. Her eyes were poisonous. She did not believe that when her sister came back, that ugly woman could still be the princess. Her sister was the rightful owner. This ugly woman was just a chess piece of His Highness. A long wind blew, and Hellion Vivian listened to the sound and was about to get up. Unexpectedly, someone was lying next to her. The man's breath hit her in the face, with a noble sandalwood scent lingering in her nose. It smelled very good. Hellion Vivian opened her eyes and reached out to take the ancient book off her face. She looked sideways and saw those bewitching thin lips only a few centimeters away from her. Hellion Vivian's first reaction was, did His Highness's misophobia get cured? Why are you looking at me like that? Didn't you send someone to find me, saying that you have something to discuss with me? Beligaju tilted his head. His long black hair and the way he curved his thin lips made her heart itch. Hellion Vivian thought, that's because I don't like the person you sent, so I wanted you to take her away. Who would have thought that you would come in person? Mini Theatre Beligaju, if I didn't come in person, what would I do? Don't forget, this is our wedding night. Hellion Vivian, didn't you say that you like men? Flips table. Chapter 253. Yes, there is something. Hellion Vivian sat up and put some distance between the two of them, but it's not a big deal. I just want to tell you that I have prepared the dowry. Beligaju raised the corner of his mouth playfully. Oh? It's not something valuable. I made it myself. Hellion Vivian directly handed the things over, thought for a while, and said, how about I give you a few more silver cards of profound heaven? Beligaju looked at her coldly. Do you think I lack that kind of thing? Hellion Vivian thought about it and stopped talking. It was a little difficult to prepare a dowry for the royal. This person really didn't seem to lack anything. Ordinary things couldn't be taken out. So she had to do it herself. It seemed that she had to work hard to earn money in the future. Later on, she could be like a certain highness, throwing out a betrothal gift, and there was no way to get a dowry in return. 12 boxes of gold, it was indeed too much. Why isn't your name engraved on it? Beligaju played with the little thing in his hand and said lazily. Hellion Vivian heard for the first time that her name was engraved on the dowry. She wondered, this is made of metal, how do you engrave it? The gold cards of profound heaven are also made of metal, but your name is engraved on it. Hellion Vivian intuitively felt Beligaju's smile turn cold. She didn't understand why. Then give me the thing, I'll engrave it. Hellion Vivian reached out and wanted to take the thing back. Beligaju glanced at her. What is given to me is mine. On the day of the wedding, I'll let you engrave it when you have the chance. On the day of the wedding? Let her engrave it. This was definitely an excuse for the royal to escape from the wedding night. Hellion Vivian smiled, she understood. Okay, you keep it first. When I'm done with the bullets, it will be complete. In fact, the most difficult part was the bullets. She was still trying. Hellion Vivian stretched her waist. The curve of her waist was very beautiful. Belagajew's eyes paused on her body. His eyes slowly darkened as he said slowly, "How's the wedding dress fitting?" "Wedding dress?" Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows and said indifferently, "I haven't tried it on yet. I'll just wear it when the time comes." "Let's try." Although Belagajew was elegant and indolent, the dominance in his bones remained unchanged. He turned his head and ordered, "Bring the princess's wedding dress over." "Yes." When the wedding dress was presented, Hellion Vivian found out that the royal family's betrothal gift included a set of wedding dress with dark embroidery patterns. The craftsmanship of the wedding dress was very exquisite. The extremely luxurious long dress was embroidered with large roses. The cuffs were outlined with gold. It was different from other wedding dresses. It was more extraordinary. When Hellion Vivian saw the wedding dress, she muttered to herself, "So this is the legendary feeling of having a sugar daddy." She estimated that this wedding dress alone could buy an entire city. "Wipe the thing on your face." Hellion Vivian looked at the white handkerchief that the royal family threw over. She wiped her face and her hands before she picked up the wedding dress. Under the white birch tree, there were only the two of them. There were shadows standing outside, so no one dared to come close. Hellion Vivian's fingers were very white, even and long. Now, with the bright red color, it was very eye-catching. It was easy to imagine her lying on a soft bed. Belagajew's eyes darkened. He suddenly reached out and grabbed her wrist. Hellion Vivian looked at him in confusion. Belagajew lifted the wedding dress that was dragging on the ground. Under the silver mask, his long and thick eyelashes were half closed. His tall nose made him look very handsome at this time. Hellion Vivian didn't expect that a certain highness would help her. She smiled and said, "This wedding dress is a bit big." "Yes." Belagajew held her wrist with his palm facing up. Hellion Vivian's fingers gently rested on his wrist. The two of them held the wedding dress together. Uneasily, her fingertips brushed against his slightly cold skin. Hellion Vivian could feel a slight friction on the back of her hand. She didn't know if it was his robe or his hand. Her face was very close to him. She could smell a faint cold breath. Hellion Vivian thought about it and said, "I'll just put it on." If he didn't leave, she couldn't change. Hearing this, Bailey Jiaoju only glanced at her. Those eyes were extremely dark, always giving people a kind of bewitching feeling. He also didn't say anything more, turned his back, but the corner of his mouth raised a trace of an arc. Originally, Hellion Vivian wanted to take care of the wedding dress in 2 or 3 moves. But here came the problem. Why was it so difficult to wear ancient clothes? "Woman, do you know how to wear it or not?" Yuan Ming lazily yawned in the fantasy space. "How long have you been fiddling with this? Why haven't you even found the cuff?" Hellion Wei absent-mindedly stopped her movements and used her consciousness to communicate with Yuan Ming. "You can shut up now. When I was in modern times, I very rarely wore dresses. The ancient Chinese costume was used to test my intelligence." "What? The wedding dress is not suitable?" Belagajew, who didn't hear the movement, slightly tilted his head. Hellion Vivian looked at the back of the tall and straight ghost standing in front of her. She gently coughed twice. "I'm still thinking about how to wear it." Belagajew didn't say anything. Hellion Vivian continued, "Let's wait until the wedding day to wear it." As she spoke, Hellion Wei wanted to tear off the wedding dress that was only half covered. But unexpectedly, halfway through, her fingers were pressed down by someone. Hellion Vivian saw the tall and straight figure bend forward slightly. It looked like he was going to help her put on the wedding dress. "Give me your left hand. This wedding dress is too complicated. The sleeves are layered on top of each other. There are crystals inlaid at the bottom. I'm afraid that I will tear the wedding dress with brute force." Hellion Vivian felt that it was necessary to explain why she didn't know how to wear ancient clothes. Otherwise, if His Highness thought that her intelligence was too low, it wouldn't be good. This would affect their future cooperation. Belagajew looked at her indifferently. There was a very calm understanding in his eyes. "Why are you so calm? What do you mean by understanding?" Hellion Vivian cursed in her heart. But she didn't know how stunning she was at this moment. She, who had regained her true appearance, was already very beautiful. At this moment, her white cheeks were a little rosy. Her fiery red robe was as smooth as silk. Under the dusk, she had a porcelain beauty. Half of her long black hair fluttered gently on the wedding dress, while the other half snaked down her straight back. She looked very beautiful. Belagaju looked at the girl who was still talking. Because she lowered her head to tidy up the wedding dress, her jet black hair fell slightly. Because of this, her white neck was drawn into a delicate curve. Belagaju inexplicably felt that this posture was very seductive. Chapter 254. Close your eyes. The man's indifferent and noble voice sounded in her ear. Hellion Vivian thought he was going to do something and raised her head. Belagaju lowered his eyes and reached out to cover half of her face with the silk wedding dress. Then, he looked at Hellion Wei's long eyelashes, as well as the mole under her eyelashes, and smiled gently at her. What was that? Hellion Vivian blinked her eyes in confusion. At that moment, Belagaju suddenly leaned over and kissed Hellion Vivian's lips through the wedding dress. Hellion Vivian's entire body froze. Her nose was filled with the unique softness of silk, but through the silk, along with Belagaju's inhalation and exhalation, there was indeed Belagaju's personal cold breath. She looked at the other party's excessively beautiful eyes and suddenly had the illusion that her thoughts were stagnant. What the hell was this? Adapt in advance. After Belagaju finished kissing, he stood up straight. His expression was calm, as if he wasn't the one who had just kissed her. However, no one knew that at that moment, what he wanted to do was more than just kiss her. Hellion Vivian chuckled. I'll have to trouble your highness to tell me when you're adapting in advance in the future, so that I can give you something thicker to isolate you. How many germs did she have on her body that he still had to kiss her through the wedding dress? But this was also very safe. Once again, it proved that their previous cooperation was indeed perfect. Hellion Wei smiled craftily. How could she have known that His Highness's preference was precisely this type of thing? It wasn't because he was obsessed with cleanliness. Even adapting in advance was merely an excuse. It was precisely because he was clear about her temperament that he didn't act rashly and alert her, especially when they were about to get married. Night, Murong Manor. In this martial chi competition, the retired emperor cut off half of the lines that we had previously buried. If it weren't for the help of that unscrupulous bastard, we wouldn't be so passive. Father, that servant girl, it's time for her to come out. The person who said this was none other than the current empress. King Murong's eyes darkened. Now is not the time. Does father mean that Bengong should continue to wait? The empress's long nails dug into the white handkerchief. If we wait any longer, that vile spawn will really get married. At that time, in less than a year, the retired emperor will let the emperor pass the throne to that vile spawn. Murong Wang looked at her and said meaningfully, that's why we have to wait until he gets married. In the past, that Hellion Vivian was just a good-for-nothing. Looking at the current situation, she is not someone to be trifled with. Would she allow someone to enter? Based on her looks, even if she was in the limelight now, she would still feel inferior in her heart. In addition, the third prince was not willing to marry her in the first place. He was only doing this to appease the retired emperor. Right now, those two people seem to have nothing to do with each other. For the time being, they can coexist peacefully. Even the third prince is a little interested in her. At that time, when that servant girl appears, the third prince will definitely feel that she is an eyesore. The first thing he will do is to kick her out and find another first consort. A woman's jealousy is the most frightening. In order to stay, Hellion Vivian will definitely do anything. At that time, we will also have a chance. Servant girl? What servant girl? Murong Feng frowned. Father, you're saying that the reason the imperial family is marrying Hellion Vivian now is because of that servant girl? King Murong smiled shrewdly. Feng, you are still young. This matter can only be seen by us, the older generation of officials. The reason the third prince married Hellion Vivian in such a high-profile manner is only to use her. Otherwise, Why do you think he would choose Hellion Vivian? It is only so that he can easily kick her away in the future. Murong Chang Fong already couldn't hear clearly what his father was saying. His heart only sank. Perhaps to Hellion Vivian, he was a bastard. But the third prince was also a bastard. Moreover, the third prince didn't understand her. That person absolutely wouldn't allow her husband to have an unclear relationship with another woman. If that kind of thing happened, she would leave very decisively. Just like how she didn't give him any face at all, the third prince's big wedding was approaching. This also meant that the court would become very turbulent during this period of time. There were many people who didn't want this big wedding to be completed. And there were also countless people who specially came for this big wedding. Thus, Hellion Vivian had just put the wedding dress back and restored her usual makeup. Just then, she saw a little bald head walking over from a distance. In his hand was a wooden stick, looking at her seriously. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows and was just about to ask something. Little seventh prince opened his mouth and said a few words like a tiger. "Hello, imperial sister-in-law." Imperial sister-in-law? Hellion Wei was a little shocked by the way he addressed her. The little one looked up like a little adult. "Where is my third brother?" That cool and arrogant look made Hellion Vivian just want to hug him and rub his head. "Looking for me?" Beligaju walked out from inside. He glanced at Hellion Vivian's eyes and then glanced at the little bald head. The little one didn't understand what his third brother meant. With a fierce face, he put the wooden stick on the ground. "Someone wants to fight with my third brother. He is now at the dean's." "I know." Bailey Jiaoju's voice was faint as he responded. He walked forward a few steps, then turned his head and said, "Let someone carry you. With your short legs, you walk too slowly." The little seventh prince stared blankly at his short and thick legs. His little mouth twitched in puzzlement. His legs were indeed short, but he wasn't slow at all. He knew Qing Gong, okay. Moreover, when he was 4 years old, his third brother held an ancient book and supported his chin. He told him in a lazy voice that as a man, he couldn't always be carried. So at that time, he walked behind his third brother like this. Why did his third brother suddenly want someone to carry him now? Puzzled, little seventh prince and Bailey Jiaoju exchanged glances, only to see that his gaze had fallen upon Hellion Wei. He immediately understood what his third brother meant. He ran in front of Hellion Vivian and stretched out his little hand. His face was still a little shy. After all, men and women shouldn't be so close. "Imperial sister-in-law, can you carry me for a while?" "Of course." Hellion Vivian couldn't ask for more. She bent down and picked the little one up. She smiled faintly. "You can come to me to carry you in the future." Hearing this, the little seventh prince felt deeply distressed. Now, his manly image was gone. Sigh, why did he have to have a third brother who knew how to cater to his interests? But, "Imperial sister-in-law, don't you like that young Master Murong?" Little seventh prince felt that he had to clarify this point. Otherwise, his third brother would be abandoned and in a bad mood and make him dance again. Chapter 255. Hellion Vivian did not expect the little one to ask her this question. She was stunned. When she looked up, she found that His Highness was looking at her with deep eyes, as if he was also waiting for her answer. "I was blind at that time." Everyone in the capital knew that she had pursued Murong Changfeng. It would be too fake to say that she had never liked him. The little one raised his eyebrows. "Then, do you want to do it now?" Beligaju's fingers paused in the middle of tidying his clothes. "Now!" Hellion Vivian blew on the little one's eyes. "Why don't you ask your third brother who he likes now?" The little one choked. He looked left and right with his big eyes. "You're not talking?" Hellion Vivian smiled and leaned close to the little one's ear. "I'll tell you a secret. I'm more difficult to deal with than your third brother, so don't gossip about me. Also, I have a bag of spiced beef in my room. I'll give it to you later." The little one's eyes lit up. He leaned in her arms and said, "Yes, yes." Then he asked, "Sister-in-law, can you cook?" "Yes." Hellion Vivian walked forward and answered the little one's questions. It was obvious that she liked the little seventh prince very much. The little one thought for a while and said, "Then don't marry third brother." "Marry me." Hellion Vivian was speechless. "I think you want to dance naked again." Belagaju took the little bald head out of Hellion Vivian's arms with one hand as if he was leading a kitten. He let the little one's two short legs dangle in the air. His voice was cold. The little bald head clenched his fist. "Third brother, you can't always treat me like this. It will affect the prestige of the royal family. The dean said that I can't always dance naked. I'll be laughed at when I grow up." "You're the one being laughed at, not me," Belagaju said slowly and reached out his hand. The little one shielded his butt and said with a pair of round eyes, "I was wrong." What's wrong?" Belagaju stopped. The little one snorted. "I shouldn't have listened to lie. Women are like clothes and brothers are like hands and feet. It's all a lie." Hellion Vivian looked at the adult and child in front of her and laughed. The man and the little one turned around at the same time and looked at her from the side. The way they raised the corners of their lips was very similar. "You guys continue." Hellion Vivian coughed softly. Not far away, a beautiful young man walked over with a murderous aura. His face was even more exquisite than a woman's. "Imperial brother, I've been waiting for you. If I don't beat you until you're looking for your teeth on the ground and wash away my previous humiliation, I'll write my name backward." Belagaju looked at him slowly and said in an indifferent tone, "Then you can write it in reverse." The obvious perfunctory reply made the beautiful young man jump up in anger. "Imperial brother, don't be so stubborn. This time, in order to defeat you, I've accepted a treasure. You'll know how powerful I am in a moment." After saying that, a whirlwind appeared behind the beautiful young man. In the rolling black waves, a silver wolf appeared in the air and pounced towards Belagaju. The beautiful young man laughed. "Imperial brother, now you know how powerful I am. My silver was contracted in the spirit forest. It's different from other mythological beasts. Other than me, it's not afraid of anyone." The shadow of the tree swayed. Belagaju didn't move at all. He only looked at the silver wolf that was pouncing towards him and narrowed his dark eyes dangerously. It was as if he could see light. The silver wolf hurriedly came to a stop. Then, step by step, he retreated back to where he came from. Hellion Vivian. What happened to not being afraid of anyone? The beautiful young man was also dumbfounded. He hugged the trembling silver wolf, his large eyes red. "Silver, what's wrong with you, Silver?" Poor little silver wolf, as soon as it left the forest, it met someone it shouldn't have met. Yuan Ming's voice rang in Hellion Vivian's ears. "How much of a shadow will this bring to its future cultivation?" Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. "You seem to know a lot about the third prince." Yuan Ming replied meaningfully, "At least I know that he's not to be trifled with. But you have to dance with wolves in the future. Woman, aren't you afraid that something will happen when the time comes?" "What can happen?" Hellion Vivian didn't care at all. "He doesn't like women." "Is that so?" Yuan Ming's thin lips curved up evilly. The beautiful young man was still hugging the silver wolf's neck and growling, "Belagaju, just you wait." Bailey Jiaoju sized him up and said slowly, "What are you waiting for?" "Wait for you to grow taller." It had to be said that the royal family was indeed an expert at angering people to death. Everyone knew that what Armament City's little tyrant hated the most was his height, which couldn't grow. Hearing Belagaju's words, the beautiful young man was so stifled he almost strangled the silver wolf in his arms. Little seventh prince seemed to have long been accustomed to his third brother's style. He ran over and patted the beautiful young man's head, his voice full of vigor. "Cousin, don't be sad, no one thought you could beat third brother. You comforting me like this, I won't be happy at all." What did he mean by "no one thought you could beat third brother"? Phew, let him catch his breath first. "You're here to attend the wedding?" Belagaju walked over and looked down at the beautiful young man whose face was full of defeat. Under normal circumstances, the overlord of Armament City couldn't leave the city. The beautiful young man brushed aside the weeds on his head. "What do you think? Kai, I really feel sad for the girl who's going to marry you. She definitely doesn't know that you're not interested in girls at all." Hellion Vivian originally wanted to be a wallflower, But after hearing the beautiful young man's words, she lightly smiled and shook his hand. Brother, I know. Fuck, how could she be his partner? The beautiful young man was slightly at a loss. She agreed to marry his royal brother like this. There must be some secret that couldn't be seen. Beligaju looked at the two people who appreciated each other, coldly laughed, and strolled over. Since you're already here, how much do you plan to give as a gift? The beautiful young man was shocked. Did he say he wanted to give as a gift? The main reason he came this time was to mock his royal brother for being forced into a marriage. Okay. Have you ever seen an expert come for revenge and give a gift to the head of his sworn enemy? Could it be that his royal brother had already forgotten how he made him swallow the foot-binding cloth last time? You still want a gift? Humph. No. Oh. Beligaju slightly raised his eyebrows. I see that the clothes you're wearing aren't bad. That's right. I used the best golden silk to make this. It's warm in the winter and cool in the summer, and it can even defend against magical beast. Speaking of his clothes, the beautiful young man was very proud to show off. However, Beligaju's following words made the smile at the corner of his mouth fiercely stiffen. Cheline, strip him naked and use his clothes as a gift. Chapter 256. What the fuck? What did he just hear? The beautiful young man looked at the red-haired man who gradually appeared. It was too late for him to grab the silver wolf and run. Fortunately, Fire Cheline still had a conscience and knew to give him a pair of underwear. But this was too much. How could he go back? This was the White Academy where people came and went. Young master. When the people from Armament City rushed over, they saw their own arrogant and overbearing master squatting in the underbrush with a flushed face, being pointed at and gossiped by countless female students passing by. There were even some female students who directly screamed and turned around to leave, not forgetting to curse when they turned around. Rogue. That shadow guard swallowed his saliva and called again, young master. The beautiful young man's angry face was even more stunning than usual. He took the robe handed over by his subordinate and draped it over his body. It was as red as fire. His eyes slightly darkened. Shut up. Yes. The shadow guard thought for a moment and said, but I'm looking for you to tell you that there's a way to break the curse on your body. Hearing this, the beautiful young man suddenly looked back. What did you just say? Say it again. There's a way to break the curse on your body. The shadow guard respectfully lowered his eyes. The Han family, generations of masters. They would all be cursed because they had once offended that legendary man. Every generation of patriarch would grow up extremely slowly. Now, thousands of years had passed, and there was no trace of that man. Their Han family could finally break this curse. The beautiful young man looked at the figure under his feet. His long sleeves slightly floated, and the corner of his mouth hooked up into a cool smile. The tip of his tongue licked his thin lips. Then what are we waiting for? I really can't wait to see if I'm more powerful or royal brother when we become adults. Pitter-patter. The sudden raindrops pitter-patter hit the wooden window. Since returning from the martial chi competition, the Hellion Jiaowa had shut herself in the room and didn't even go out. She would make a fuss once or twice every day, and no servant dared to go in to serve her. Su Yang Mo saw this and her heart ached. Jiaowa, you have to eat something. I can't eat. When the Hellion Jiaowa saw Su Yang Mo, she clenched her fists and punched the wooden bed. Mother, why did the royal family choose that little bitch? That little bitch isn't even 1/100th of my looks. What is His Highness thinking? Su Yang Mo caressed her beloved daughter's long hair and said with a sinister look in her eyes, the third prince needs a princess consort to shut the mouths of the ministers. That little bastard is just lucky to be used as a pawn by the third prince. However, with her looks, the third prince will not be sincere to her. Then why did His Highness betroth me to a eunuch? I can't accept this. I should be the one marrying into the imperial palace. Su Yang Mo looked at her beloved daughter's red eyes and said in a gloomy voice, Jiaowa, don't worry. Mother won't let that little bitch get away with it so easily. Mother has arranged everything. Didn't you say that the little bitch didn't look like herself? I also suspect that she has been possessed. The third prince's wedding will be attended by eminent monks from all over the country. When the time comes, Mother will make sure that little bitch shows her true colors. She won't even be able to enter the imperial palace. Possessed. Helian Jiawa blinked her teary eyes and remembered what happened before. She shuddered and reached out to grab Madame Su's hand. Mother, there's something that I always thought I saw wrong. Now that I think about it, it's not impossible. On the day of the martial chi competition, there seemed to be a shadow following behind that little bitch. Do you think that shadow is the person who is occupying Helian Vivian's body now? Su Yang Mo was only guessing before. Now that she heard her beloved daughter say this, her whole body trembled. Jiawa, why didn't you tell me this earlier? I just remembered it today. Helian Jiawa paused. Su Yang Mo patted her hand. If she has really been possessed, we don't need to teach that little bitch a lesson. The whole world will ostracize her. Just wait and see. Mother will definitely taste the feeling of being despised by thousands on the day of the wedding. The day of the wedding? Why wait until the day of the wedding? Helian Jiawa's eyes were sinister. Your daughter wants that little bitch to die right now. Su Yang Mo tapped her forehead. You little girl, why don't you think about it? If we don't wait until the day of the wedding, how am I going to make use of those eminent monks? Over the years, the eminent monks have always chanted the scriptures on the prince's wedding. This time, we just need to change the scriptures slightly and let those eminent monks force out the evil in Helian Vivian's body. That little bitch will have reached the end of her journey. Creak. The graceful and luxurious wooden door slowly closed. Deep in the palace, a shadow walked in and knelt on the ground. Your Highness. Beligaju put down the scroll in his hand. His fingers rested on the throne while his other hand lazily supported his chin. He said coldly, Speak. The matter has been investigated. Shadow lowered his eyes. Miss Helian is indeed the miss of the past. As for her temperament, it is said that after she was divorced, she couldn't think straight and jumped into the river. After she was fished out, there was a change. According to the maids of the defense division, they were also very surprised that someone who jumped into the river could actually survive. Beligaju didn't speak. His fingers slowly turned the black jade ring on his little finger. Shadow sized up his master's expression. Your Highness, do you think it could be? The word possession was not out of his mouth. Beligaju interrupted him. Seal off all news. I don't want anyone to know about this matter, including the retired emperor. Yes. Shadow lowered his head, but he was faintly uneasy. Beligaju raised his eyes. Go investigate again. Find out who is paying attention to this matter. After you find out, directly cut off their source. This subordinate obeys. Shadow retreated, but his eyebrows were wrinkled. What did His Highness mean? Did he want to conceal this matter for the miss? But the imperial family couldn't allow someone to be possessed, let alone marry into the imperial palace. His Highness, what was he thinking? Hualala. A cool breeze blew. Helian Vivian sat on the edge of the bronze mirror, her eyes shining. These days, she clearly felt that someone was investigating her. Even profound heavens had people mixed in. This made Helian Vivian have a strong premonition that someone was beginning to suspect her. However, Helian Vivian had always been that kind of person. She didn't cause trouble, but when trouble came, she wasn't afraid of trouble. It's just that in the Dragon War Empire, there was no leeway to deal with possession. The imperial family was extremely disgusted with this kind of person. They would always treat people as monsters. Helian Vivian found it hard to imagine. If she told His Highness that she was an arms tycoon from a few thousand years in the future, would His Highness directly enforce justice on behalf of the heavens and punish her? Chapter 257. No, with His Highness's temperament, he would not stain his hands with blood. Perhaps, he would hand her over to the country or something. Ha ha ha. Woman, what are you doing? Yuan Ming looked at Helian Vivian puzzledly. It was just a wedding, did she have to carry a dagger all over her body? Helian Vivian smiled. Of course, it's self-defense. With your current level of martial chi, who are you afraid of hurting you? Yuan Ming raised his eyebrows. Helian Vivian lazily picked up the teacup and took a sip. I'm not afraid, I'll just stab whoever dares to stab me. You're saying that someone will cause trouble for the wedding? Yuan Ming smirked. Then he really has eyes but can't see. Hellion Vivian smiled playfully. Wasn't he blind? Checking her like this, did he think that he wouldn't notice? It was just that she was not sure what Su Yang Mo wanted to do with her. But Yuan Ming narrowed his eyes. Woman, you better be careful. If people find out that you chose to be a demon cultivator, you will definitely be expelled from the Dragon War Empire. At that time, it will be difficult for you to take back the Hellion family. I know. Hellion Vivian smiled. So, I've thought of a way out in advance. This is the way out that you were talking about. Yuan Ming looked at young Master He, whom he had not seen for a long time and was about to jump over the wall. He really did not understand what logic this was. Hellion Vivian ignored Yuan Ming and looked at Hazy. What I asked you to do, how is it going? Of course it's done. Hazy smiled and patted the fallen leaves on his shoulder. But, what's the matter with you? Don't you want to stay in the palace after marrying the third prince? Hellion Wei smiled. Even if I don't want to stay, I still have to stay for more than a month. It's just that after more than a month, my matters will be more or less settled. I really have no interest in staying in an imperial palace that eats people without spitting out the bones. Will the third prince allow you to do this? He-Eyes was very doubtful. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. We've discussed this before. It's not a problem. All right then. He-Eyes still frowned. But why do you want to change your identity? Because at that time, there would definitely be people who would investigate her thoroughly. No matter how powerful she was, she would not be able to withstand being treated as a monster and used as a barbecue. To start afresh. Hellion Vivian smiled faintly. My main purpose is to take revenge, and the third prince's purpose is to deal with the retired emperor. After this matter is over, I will change my identity and be free and unfettered. It will be more comfortable. Hellion Vivian was speaking the truth. She didn't plan to stay in the palace forever. It wasn't as interesting as building a machine gun squad. However, she couldn't overdo it. Otherwise, people would be able to tell that she wasn't a flaw of this world. Before she could avenge her family, she had to take root in the imperial palace. Not only did it have to germinate, but it also had to secretly help Beligaju obtain that supreme position. Because that was their engagement. He-Eyes' eyes lit up, as if he was relieved. It's good that you can think like this. He was worried that she would fall too deep, and it would not be easy to clean up when the time came. One had to know that that woman would be back very soon. At that time, how could there still be a place for Hellion Vivian in the imperial palace? Hellion Vivian keenly sensed that there was a hidden meaning in his words. What do you mean by that? He-Eyes was just about to open his mouth. A roar came from the other side of the wall. Where's that stinking brat? Where did he run off to be free and unfettered? He-Eyes' expression changed. He pressed his forehead as if he was having a headache. I'm leaving first. See you another day. Okay. Hellion Vivian held back her laughter. It was rare to see the overbearing second young master suffer like this. That scene was really too good. Thinking about it, just as she was about to turn around, she heard footsteps behind her. The sound of footsteps on the snow was very obvious. She didn't know if it was because of the strong aura of the person who came, but the night wind blew a little stronger. The coldness was like little snakes drilling into people's collars, freezing their bones. Hellion Vivian couldn't help but shiver. She looked back and saw Beligaju standing at the entrance of the alley. His long robe and cape fluttered in the wind. In the black velvety night, the moonlight shone down from above, casting his shadow on the ground. It was like a cage, as if it was an old piece of clothing taken out from last year, with the surface covered in plush. He looked at her. His eyes were cold and noble, like a vampire prince who had walked out of a manga. The side of his face with a silver mask was like broken ice, exquisite and perfect. Hellion Vivian's fingers were a little stiff, especially under that ice-like gaze. She believed that if it was another person, they would definitely feel cold all over. Only, she wasn't sure how much of what they just said, His Highness heard. Bailey Joju opened his mouth, his tone was as indifferent as an ice stream, but he instructed Shadow at his side, go tell Elder Hay, Just say that Imperial Grandfather is preparing to bestow a marriage to the Nayland family's 7th Miss. Ask Elder Hay if he has any candidates to recommend. Yes. Shadow accepted the order and left. Hellion Vivian heard this and wrinkled her eyebrows. Bestow a marriage for Nayland family's 7th Miss. Was this the rhythm of forcing Hazy to his death? That childhood sweetheart of his seemed to be ranked 7th in the Nayland family. I thought that at this time, you should be in your boudoir waiting to be married, and not appear under the Hay family's wall. That deep, steady, and slightly magnetic voice sounded again. It was like golden sand slowly sliding past the side of her ear, with the texture of cold metal. When Hellion Vivian heard this, she didn't know where to start. You came out so late. Have you ever thought that I would look for you everywhere because I didn't see you at the academy? This time, his background was a lush forest. It was late at night, and the green and black paint mixed together, giving off a gloomy smell. This man should be a natural negotiation expert. His methods were definitely not the same as his flawless handsome figure. Don't look at his languid, elegant, and indifferent appearance. The more this kind of person was, the more unusual their methods were. For example, right now, Hellion Vivian actually had a feeling that she did something wrong. Speaking of which, she really shouldn't have run out 3 days before the wedding. However, didn't this also mean that the other party didn't hear the conversation between her and Hazy just now? Beligaju looked at her. If he didn't find out that there really was nothing between the two of them, if he didn't test Hazy and know that he had a childhood sweetheart that he couldn't let go, when he saw that scene just now, he was afraid that he would really kill Hazy. No one could touch his prey, let alone in this kind of late at night. Moreover, it was so late. Why did she come to find Hazy? Even if something really happened, shouldn't she come to find him, her fiancé? Chapter 258. You've been caught. Woman, let's see how you explain this. Yuan Ming gave a schadenfreude smile. Hellion Vivian raised an eyebrow and directly cut off the communication with him. She looked up at Beligaju. Isn't it said that the bride and groom can't see each other for 3 days before the wedding? I thought you wouldn't go to the academy. She remembered that there was such a rule in ancient times. Beligaju looked at her. There was a black ring on his finger. The ring seemed to be made of jade. With his movements, it reflected the light of ice and snow, so you can come out and date someone else with a clear conscience. His tone was very light. When Hellion Vivian heard this question, she almost couldn't help coughing. Beligaju looked at her choked expression and his eyes were as indifferent as usual. Hellion Vivian seriously looked at him. We're just chatting. Just chatting. Beligaju gave a cold laugh. It was clear that he didn't believe her words. Hellion Vivian gave an UN sound. She had already said everything she could say. Hearing this, Beligaju's eyes slowly revealed a smile. But that smile was a bit cold. Reflecting the light in his eyes, it was very moving. At first glance, it gave people a shocking feeling. He suddenly leaned forward and used his slender fingers to push aside her long hair. The man's cold aura instantly enveloped her and his deep voice sounded in her ears. Do you think this highness will believe your words, People should maintain the most basic trust between each other. Hellion Vivian met his eyes and smiled, not to mention that we're about to get married. The written agreement is here. Beligaju's eyes fell on her white neck and he gave a faint smile. You're right, we're about to get married. Hellion Vivian knit her brows. Why did she feel that such a normal sentence had a different meaning when it came from this highness' mouth? And Ying, send the princess back. Beligaju retracted his hand and stood upright. His expression was ascetic and indifferent, but his dark and deep eyes made Hellion Vivian feel that he seemed to be thinking about something. The night wind whistled and the tree branches swayed back and forth. It was as if an invisible hand was slowly closing in on the quiet general's residence. In the dark, Su Yang Mo looked left and right. Then, with the help of her maidservants, she walked into an abandoned courtyard. There was a person standing in the courtyard, pacing back and forth as if he was thinking about something. When she saw Su Yang Mo walking over, her eyes lit up and her face was filled with joy. Madam Su. Sure. Su Yang Mo put her finger to her lips and gestured for him to lower his voice. She then signaled the maid behind her with her eyes. The servant girl cleverly stood outside the courtyard, as if to keep a lookout for them. Everything was going on in secret. The person who came was none other than the matchmaker who was in charge of Hellion Vivian's sedan chair. The matchmaker was overjoyed. When she saw Su Yang Mo, she tried to lower her voice and said, "Rest assured, Madam Su. This old servant has prepared everything according to your instructions. On the day of the wedding, this old servant will definitely cooperate." "That's good." Su Yang Mo smiled coldly, her expression filled with hatred. That little bastard ruined 2 of her daughters in one go. If she didn't teach her a lesson, how could she let it go? When the eminent monks did the deed, she didn't need to do anything. The 3rd prince who married her would take her life directly. The night gradually sank. For the next 3 days, Hellion Vivian didn't go anywhere. There were no classes in the White Academy. The next class would probably be after the wedding. So, Hellion Vivian simply sat cross-legged on the floor and fiddled with her pile of armaments. However, the mercenaries came twice to report the recent situation of the Hellion family. Probably the elders wanted her to go back, but Hellion Guang Yarrow didn't agree. Hellion Vivian wasn't anxious at all. She took out 100,000 taels and let the mercenaries arrange it accordingly. She had always believed that money could make the devil turn millstones. She wanted to see how long Hellion Guang Yarrow could hold on. If you eat something and then spit it out, it will definitely not feel good. However, Hellion Guang Yarrow, have you forgotten that everything you have now belongs to my mother, including the food and clothing of your wife and daughter? You think it's over here? How could it be? She had just started. Woman, if you treat Hellion Guang Yarrow like this, sooner or later you will have to face the 4 great families. Yuan Ming said with an evil charm, "You're still too inexperienced to deal with them with your current strength. I know them very well. Those old men don't have any humanity when they do things. Even us demons can't stand it." Hellion Vivian finished the last set of armaments and smiled softly. "You know them very well, but Yuan Ming, you don't know me well enough." Yuan Ming was stunned. The corners of his mouth curled up even more. 2 days later. A grand wedding, 10 miles away from the bride. Beligaju wore a wedding robe with exquisite workmanship. The robe was embroidered with purple cloud dragon rattan. Even the cuffs were outlined with the most complicated golden pattern, showing its great value. His figure was tall and handsome, his face was clear and handsome, and his temperament was extraordinary. His slender and fair hands were holding a black horse rope, and his slender legs were resting on both sides of the war horse. The bright red robe he was wearing made his skin look even fairer. The north wind fluttered his wide sleeves, making him look like an imperial god from the barren land from afar. Behind him was a bright red sedan chair carried by 8 people. The decorations behind the sedan chair occupied almost half the street. The common people scrambled to stand on tiptoe and look at this side, their mouths letting out surprised exclamations. Hellion Vivian was still sitting in the bridal chamber. She was probably the first young lady from a big family who didn't have parents to send her off. However, she didn't feel anything. Therefore, she didn't tell the news of the wedding to the Supreme Master who was participating in the martial chi competition in other empires. Sitting on a wooden chair, she lazily let the servant comb her hair and yawned from time to time. I couldn't help but look at her. Although she didn't want to admit it, this Hellion Vivian was indeed a little different. She had never seen anyone so leisurely and relaxed before marriage. What's more, she was marrying a master, a person who could only stand in the clouds. At this point, even her sister couldn't compare. Those dangling ornaments don't need, it's tiring to wear them. Hellion Vivian leaned back, her slender legs slightly crossed. Her bare feet stepped on the floor as if she was beating a beat. That kind of casual elegance revealed, unexpectedly made people not dare to say anything. The wedding nanny who was waiting on the side watched, thinking that this figure was not bad, but that face was too dark. No matter how many layers of powder she put on, it was useless. Fortunately, this 3rd prince could endure, there was probably no other way. Chapter 259. Miss, don't blame me for being talkative. The matchmaker carried the things for her and said, even an ordinary young master has 1 or 2 maids at home. His Highness must have maids by his side. Once you leave home, you will be a young lady. You should weigh the pros and cons of this matter. Hearing this, Helene Vivian smiled slowly. The word serve sounded nice in ancient times. In fact, it was a concubine. The people who were sent to protect her the last time were all jealous. Did they really think that Helene Vivian didn't know anything? However, the matchmaker chose to say this at this time. Was she deliberately making trouble for her? Helene Vivian opened her eyes and glanced at the matchmaker. Just a glance made the matchmaker's scalp numb. She took back her hand embarrassedly. Haha, it's late. Miss, get on the sedan chair as soon as possible. Helene Vivian stretched herself. Her toes were dyed red. She stepped on the wooden floor, which made people unable to describe her beauty. Don't follow me. I don't like that face. The matchmaker froze on the spot, and her smile tightened. Eldest miss, what did this old woman say to make you unhappy? This old woman can change. It's against the rules to get on the sedan chair without a matchmaker. Helene Vivian glanced at her and smiled slightly. The matchmaker thought that her chance had come. She still wanted to say something. But Helene Vivian continued, take her away. Today is a big day. I don't want to hear anyone say that it's against the rules. Yes. The mercenaries flashed away. The matchmaker disappeared in the room. Helene Vivian's face didn't change. She stretched out her hands and put on the wedding dress. Baimai looked at her walking lazily and casually. She thought for a while and said, Princess, His Highness doesn't have a concubine maid. Helene Vivian turned her face and suddenly smiled. I know. Baimai was stunned. How did Princess know? People with misophobia won't tolerate anyone touching them casually. Besides, Helene Vivian paused for a moment, and the corners of her mouth curled up slightly. If there is anyone, it should be the servant of the bedwarmer. Baimai frowned. What bedwarmer? However, in reality, when the Empress left her sister by His Highness' side, it was indeed for His Highness to use as a concubine. But, forget it, why was she thinking so much? Baimai. A clear and lazy voice sounded in his ears. Baimai didn't expect Helene Vivian to remember her name. She looked at her. She saw that person stretch out his hand and tug at his collar. He tilted his head and looked at her. His posture was indescribably handsome. This wedding is between me and Your Highness. If something happens, Your Highness will be the one to lose face. Baimai's fingers paused. She didn't dare to think about anything else and answered respectfully, yes. She thought that it was fortunate that Heiju was not here. They had all misjudged the woman in front of them. Her methods may not be inferior to His Highness. The auspicious hour has arrived. There was a burst of festive music outside. The red veil fell. Helene Vivian was carried into the sedan chair. Beligaju rode his horse at the front. His fingers were slender and smooth. His fingernails were pink and translucent. There was a faint light of pearls. His whole body was surrounded by the aura of nobility. More than half of the female guests on the street had their eyes on him. There was amazement in their eyes. There were also sighs of envy. Although Helene Vivian was no longer the trash of the past, with her beauty, she could still marry the third prince. How could people not be jealous? Helene Jiawa gritted her teeth. She looked at such a grand wedding. Her poisonous eyes slowly slid past the sedan chair beside Helene Vivian. In a short while, a wonderful scene was about to unfold. In front of the civil and military officials, she was forced to show her magic. She didn't believe that Helene Vivian could still live. She really couldn't wait to see that scene. Helene Vivian didn't see any of this. Her head was still covered with the red veil. She listened to the music and held a big red apple in her hand. Marriage was a tiring thing, not to mention marrying a prince. The etiquette was more complicated than a cow's hair. Helene Vivian swayed and felt that she was about to fall asleep. She yawned from time to time. Baimai followed the sedan chair on the left and right. She was always paying attention to the movements around her. Yuan Ming felt bored and asked, Woman, What does it feel like to get married? Tiring. Hellion Vivian couldn't move under the phoenix coronet. Her neck was crushed. She was just about to relax her muscles. Then, a series of vague exorcism chants and prayers entered his ears at the same time. Hellion Vivian knew that it was not appropriate to open the curtain now, so she just gently raised her eyebrows. Yuan Ming stood up anxiously. This is an exorcism spell. Exorcism spell? Hellion Vivian frowned. What's that? Yuan Ming narrowed his eyes. I can still resist the incantation to reveal my true form, but when you get out of the palanquin and approach those chanting monks, I will definitely not be able to control myself and reveal my true form, swallowing all of them. Logically speaking, this kind of spell shouldn't be chanted on the day of the wedding. Woman, you guessed right. There are indeed people who have begun to suspect that you have been possessed. They want to catch you on the day of the wedding. Hellion Vivian didn't say anything. Su Yang Mo, who was standing not far away, looked at the sedan chair approaching Xuanwu Gate. She couldn't help but tiptoe. Where was the matchmaker? Where was the matchmaker? The original plan was that the matchmaker would immediately open the curtain and let Hellion Vivian get out of the sedan chair as soon as she heard the chanting. Now that the matchmaker was missing, there was no doubt that there was a flaw in the plan. However, Su Yang Mo wasn't worried. That little bastard couldn't hide in the sedan chair for the rest of her life. As long as she got out, even if she was supported by the third prince, her true form would definitely be revealed. Woman, why don't we just make a scene and completely fall into the devil's path? Yuan Ming licked his thin lips with the tip of his tongue. In fact, those old monks were quite to his liking. Hellion Vivian took the apple away and said calmly, don't ignore the consequences just to eat. I don't want to be demonized. Then what do we do now? Are you just going to walk out like this? Yuan Ming's voice had just stopped. He realized that the chanting sound was louder. This kind of sound would definitely affect the owner. Sure enough, when he looked up, Hellion Vivian's forehead was already overflowing with sweat, but her eyes were bright. Speaking of which, this is also an opportunity. Hellion Vivian said with a smile, as long as they don't make any trouble today, they won't send people to Wei Zi World in the future. I also won't have to worry about my identity being discovered one day. Just like what Yuan Ming had said, the crux of the matter was how to get there. She was already tired and sleepy, but she didn't expect that the illusory chanting of sutras could really cause her to feel pain. The feeling of being about to leave her body made her body lean forward slightly. Chapter 260. As if sensing her discomfort, the chanting grew louder. Su Yang Mo's face was clearly smug. Hellion Vivian's head was throbbing as she gripped the sedan chair's beam tightly. Hearing the gasps outside the sedan chair, she narrowed her eyes. Before she could react to what was happening, the sedan chair's curtains were suddenly lifted and her entire body was lifted up in a princess carry. The cold sandalwood scent at the tip of her nose seeped into her spleen and lungs. Hellion Vivian didn't need to think to know who it was. However, the royal's action was indeed unexpected. Didn't he dislike others touching him? Moreover, was this in accordance with the rules? Hellion Wei listened to the cries of surprise all around and immediately knew what rules and regulations. His Highness had most likely done another world-shocking thing. Hold on tight. The low voice sounded beside her ear, making her feel a little ticklish. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. Before she could move, she heard him call out faintly through the bridal veil, Celine. In an instant, Hellion Vivian only felt a gust of wind blow past. Even though she couldn't see what was in front of her, she could imagine it. The fire Celine with red fur appeared in front of everyone. Its huge claws pushed against the ground, causing the chanting monks to vomit blood one by one. Although the Celine was a mythical beast, it came from the demon world. It was said that if it wasn't for that man, no one could make it willingly become a mount. The blood flowing in the fire Celine's body clashed with the exorcism incantation that the monks were chanting. Its appearance this time. The monk's cultivation would take at least 8 years, if not 10 years. Ever since the fire Celine appeared, everyone was stunned. The Pantheon Palace. It stood majestically, its claws snaking towards Bellegaju's feet as if it was saying, "Master." The elders of the 4 great families were sitting behind the monks. They reached out and pressed on the wooden chairs with such force that it was as if they wanted to crush the chairs. The fire chaleen that they had tried so hard to get was actually obeying the orders of the royal family. When did this happen? Why didn't the spies they planted in the palace report anything? An unprecedented sense of crisis caused them to focus. It was as if a raging fire was burning in their hearts, but they couldn't show it. Bellegaju's slightly curly long hair fell vertically along with the cloak. His wine-red wedding robe fluttered, and his slender figure stood tall and straight. Half of his body was fiery red, and the other half was pitch black. The rich color difference gave people an indescribable shock. He carried Hellion Vivian in his arms. His posture was elegant, his eyes were indifferent, and he exuded a strong aura of abstinence. Under the beautiful mask, his thin lips were slightly raised, with a faint evil smile. Separated by the bridal veil, Hellion Vivian couldn't see anything. She was deep in the dark fog, and the only thing she could feel was his slightly cold fingers. They wrapped around her knees and pressed down on the pit of her leg. Only then did she order the fire chaleen, "Lead the way." Hearing this, the fire chaleen pressed its claws and raised its beautiful neck slightly. When its red feathers rose, countless flames blossomed into huge fireworks. The big bird flew across, shuttling back and forth in the fireworks, raising its head and chirping. This was the real beginning of the wedding. 80 miles away, the fireworks gradually grew bigger, and the sky was filled with magnificence. The fire chaleen opened the way in front. Bellegaju walked out of the fireworks. His long hair fluttered in the dark, and his footsteps were crisp. It was the sound of the ground being trampled on. His hands were always carrying Hellion Vivian. He was absolutely unrestrained and unrestrained. He was the only one who was favored. This kind of grand wedding made everyone who came to watch the ceremony so stunned that their eyes widened. It was such a luxurious scene. Counting before and after, it had never been seen before in the past 100 years. Everyone wanted to be the woman in his arms. However, what they didn't know was that other than Hellion Vivian, no one could maintain that kind of indolence in this kind of environment. Hugging her like this felt pretty good. Hellion Vivian nestled in Bellegaju's arms and wantonly yawned. Coupled with the man's cold and ascetic aura, they completely brought out the best in each other. Bellegaju didn't think much of it. His long and narrow eyes raised. "Didn't sleep well yesterday?" Hellion Vivian's eyelids sank again in this position. Bellegaju's voice was indifferent. "Did you go on a date when I wasn't here again?" Hellion Vivian's fingers stiffened. She was completely awake. Why did this royal family have to mention that? It was as if she had really done something wrong to him. "Oh right, why did you call the fire chaleen out?" Hellion Vivian seemed to have thought of something. Through the bridal veil, she lowered her voice. "Is it really okay to let people know that you have recovered your martial chi?" Bellegaju didn't care at all. There's no such thing as good or bad. When Wei heard that tone of voice of his, she knew that the other party didn't put those old men in his eyes at all. Someone who could be this arrogant to this extent, in the entire Dragon War Empire, she reckoned that only a certain highness could do so. However, this actually helped her. The appearance of the fire chaleen just happened to suppress the continuation of those Buddhist scriptures. Should it be a coincidence? Hellion Vivian raised her head. She wanted to see Bellegaju's expression, but found that she couldn't see anything except the bridal veil. "What are you doing?" Bellegaju reached out and stopped her from lifting the bridal veil. Hellion Vivian blinked. "I want to see what they are sighing about." "Don't worry, when I was in the sedan, I washed my face with tomatoes. Now it's white and clean." "Then I can't let you lift it." Bellegaju's eyes deepened. This was his prey. He should be the first to see her most beautiful appearance. The bride can only lift the bridal veil after entering the bridal chamber. Bellegaju's voice didn't have the slightest bit of bullying. His tone was cold and noble. "Do you want to break the rules?" Hellion Vivian's fingers paused and didn't move again. But the fire chaleen who was walking in front slanted its steps and almost slipped. "What breaking the rules? Master is too good at pretending." In its opinion, it's just a desire to monopolize. Beligaju raised his eyes and faintly looked at the mythological beast walking in front of him. Although that gaze was calm, it still made the fire Chaline's spirit tense up. It resumed its posture of holding its head high and continuing to walk forward. It was so dazzling that people couldn't move their eyes away. Helian Jiao stared blankly at this scene that made her jealous to the point of insanity. She had never thought that this godlike person would actually do such a thing in front of hundreds of civil and military officials. It was completely out of her expectations. Helian Jiao clenched her hands. Why? Why can this cheap woman get special treatment from the royal family? All of this should have belonged to her. Whether it was the royal family's love or the 10 li of red makeup. If it wasn't for Helian Vivian stirring up trouble, she would have been together with the royal family. How could this cheap woman get her turn? Jiao. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.